Hi everyone, good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Jason Smith had never pretended to be something he wasn't. At school, everyone knew him as the son of a successful businessman. At university, he was considered a major who could not afford anything: money, cars, pretty girls, and revealing dresses. And even as the owner of the company, he managed to maintain the image of a wealthy bachelor and pro-lifer. Now Jason was about to become a hobo. That's what they wear on the street. He won't recognize me. He won't recognize me unless I take the janitor's stuff. You know, the one who quit a long time ago. I was going to throw it away. And now I have the chance, the boy puzzled. Of course, the idea of learning from vagrants belonged only to him and no one else. In fact, plainer clothes would have sufficed. But Jason wanted to transform himself so that in case of an unexpected meeting, he wouldn't be recognized even by his own mother.
He'd bought makeup and a wig, and he'd dusted off the clothes he was supposed to wear, stomped sneakers he had never had, and therefore had to build them artificially. Jason smiled at his reflection in the mirror. He was looking at a grimy guy, old, fat, wearing tattered jeans and a baseball cap with the visor missing in several places.
"There, that's better," he whispered with a smile and headed off to meet the woman he was supposed to see for the first time. Jason knew he was being reckless, of course, but he had no other choice. He'd given his word 2 days ago, and he was sure he'd keep it no matter what.
When Jason had left the house, his gait and demeanor had changed. Now he was a vagabond with a running gaze and a cautious, almost cat-like step. As he approached the cafe building, he looked around and pulled the doorknob with a determined look. At that moment, the thoughts in the businessman's head ran backwards, involuntarily bringing him back to the time when everything had just begun. And it had begun with an event that at first glance had nothing to do with the subsequent scheme.
Paul Smith glanced at the face of his wristwatch and grumbled unhappily. Well, where's he been hanging around? Is it really possible to be late for a meeting like this? Then the businessman shifted his gaze to the small briefcase that lay on the table at his right hand. A satisfied smile immediately appeared on Paul's face. The briefcase contained money, not so much to marvel at the amount, but not so little as to underestimate its power. In Paul Smith's hands, money was the means by which he intended to acquire a firm whose owner had recently declared bankruptcy. The businessman glanced again at his watch as he changed his mind. What if he doesn't come or finds the proposed deal unimportant? The firm is not bad on the whole. Only time and effort will be required. Finally, the door of the restaurant opened and Brian appeared in the lobby. A confident gait, a haughty look, and a hypertrophied sense of self-importance that was felt by everyone who met his gaze. Paul Smith felt it too, when the long-awaited owner of the company unceremoniously plumped into a chair in front of the astonished businessman. He asked, "Well, are you ripe? Are you buying, or have you changed your mind while you were collecting money? Because I might find another buyer." Paul paused for a moment to prevent the insolent man from seizing the initiative, then replied,
"No, I haven't changed my mind. It's all on the table. You have the money with you, I hope." Paul grinned. "With me, of course. What are we talking about?" Brian pulled some papers out of a folder and held them out. Of course, the long notarization of the deal was ahead of them, but the first and major step had been taken right here in the restaurant.
"Why don't you want to get the firm off the ground yourself? How many years has it been idle? Why are you selling it so cheaply? It's much more profitable to grow your own business than to get money from selling it, losing all the profits," Paul asked. Brian wrinkled his nose. To tell the truth, he was annoyed by this polite UN business courtesies. But if he could get a grip on himself, he might not even notice the trouble. Why be nervous about nothing? But Brian did answer the question.
"Why do I need this firm? I'll find another one. No problem. How many bankrupt firms are there in the city? There's always some loser who's going to go bad at some point. There's this little firm, owned by some girls before me. Naive, simple as a cork. So I taught them a lesson, and at the same time, I took over the company, but not me, so someone else. What difference does it make?
Paul Smith shook his head. Feeling the intense irritation of dealing with this insolent bugger, he knew that Brian was a vulture, a man who bought up bankrupt businesses for next to nothing and sold them for a lot more. There were rumors in town that in some cases Brian himself helped owners go bankrupt, acting by raiding methods.
Finally, the preliminary agreements were reached, and the partners left the restaurant. Paul Smith exhaled a sigh of relief. Dealing with Brian had been worth it, especially considering his business partner's bad reputation. He also wanted very badly to wash his hands with soap and water, as if he had touched something dirty and disgusting before. On the other hand, he hadn't done anything wrong and had just bought the firm that Brian had resolved. Not him, someone else. As they say, no big deal. At least Paul Smith's son will now be in business and won't be going to the pubs and nightclubs. Well, that'll be a test for him. A test of strength, so to speak.
The insistent trill of the alarm clock jerked Jason out of a deep sleep. He cringed and opened his eyes with difficulty, whispering, "Oh, I have to go to work again." Damn it, there was a simple explanation for the heavy awakening. Jason had stayed up late last night working on paperwork and had gone to bed after midnight. Now his body was taking revenge on its master and refusing to work as it should. Jason got out of bed and went to the bathroom to take a contrast shower.
At the moment, it was the only thing that would bring him back to life and make him finally wake up from his shower. Jason brewed a strong cup of coffee, which finally cheered him up and put him in the mood for work. He had only recently taken over the firm after his father had bought him a company that had been declared bankrupt. Of course, he could have put his own business in his son's hands, but he was in no hurry to do so and took a wait-and-see attitude.
Jason understood this and worked hard to prove his father's worthiness. Paul Smith started at the bottom, and the firm was his brainchild. Sometime back in the 90s, he left the factory and plunged into the turbulent waters of business. Jason was a late bloomer. I guess you could say he suffered. Paul and Sarah had gone to all kinds of places and tests. Nothing. The pregnancy either failed early or never came at all, and the age was such that they could not waste time thinking about it. And when they were about to adopt a boy from an orphanage, a real miracle happened. The pregnancy test showed such a desirable 2 stripes. However, this in itself did not mean anything, because Sarah was afraid that she would not be able to bear a child. Paul then was not himself, literally carried his wife in his arms. Despite the fact that the entire pregnancy Sarah was worried about severe intoxication, dizziness, the birth itself was surprisingly easy. Paul's happiness knew no bounds. At last he would have an heir. What could be better? But the older his son got, the more Paul began to doubt that he would be able to lead their family business.
Jason was too frivolous and wasteful. Restaurants, nightclubs, and expensive cars. Of course, Jason wasn't what you'd call a spendthrift. Anyway, he was thinking about the future, and he was even dating the girl he considered his fiancée. Violet, like Jason, had grown up in a wealthy family. At first glance, they had plenty to talk about.
On the other hand, Jason felt that he lacked a breath of fresh air and a sense of freedom when he was with his fiancée. Violet was predictable to the point of boredom, thinking only of beauty salons, restaurants, and expensive things. Of course, Jason wasn't a saint either, but he still wanted something different, something that would make him cheer up and savor life. Because of that, he occasionally threw rowdy parties where he tried to get rid of his feelings of longing and loneliness. But on the other hand, such qualities could lead to the decline of the family business, which had always been the #1 goal in his father Paul Smith's life. No, this can't go on indefinitely. Something has to change, or his pubbing and partying will drive him into bankruptcy, Paul had said at dinner one night. Sarah looked at her husband anxiously, as any mother would. She was devoted to her son, and was willing to forgive him for his misdeeds. "Honey, but Jason is still so young. Who doesn't make mistakes at his age?" Sarah said. Paul pressed his lips together unhappily. "Mistakes? His mistakes have been costing me too much lately. Michael Johnson is the same age as Jason, and he's already helping his father. He could be a nightclubber, too." Sarah wanted to say something in defense of her son, but stopped halfway through. It was a waste of time to argue with Paul when he was in this state. Then again, Jason could get hurt. It was better to wait out the storm and choose a more convenient moment to talk. But Paul wasn't going to stay silent that night, and he wasn't going to avoid the hot topics of conversation. "Here's what I'm thinking. Sarah, I'm going to buy him a company. I've been looking at one recently. They're selling it for pennies. The former owner went bankrupt. They found the debt. And this direction is the most promising. If you're smart about it and set up a workflow, you won't have any problems for a long time." "What if Jason doesn't succeed?" "It's not an easy job, and he has no experience at all," his mother asked anxiously. "It's okay. It's something you can learn. He'll figure it out. I think it's not for nothing that he studied at university for so many years. Now let him prove himself." Sarah bit her lip painfully, imagining how hard it would be for her son. Of course, Jason didn't know any of this and continued to enjoy his life. The epiphany came when his father handed him the controlling interest in the company and the keys to the office. "Here, son, take it. This firm belongs to you now. Your future depends on how you run it," Paul said. Jason looked at his father in surprise, but accepted the offer. Where could he go? His carefree life was over. He shrugged his shoulders and took the job. True. Then the guy did not know what awaited him in the near future. Managing the firm for only a month, Jason faced a severe shortage of staff, especially cleaners and security guards. The problem was that most of the staff had quit. Those that remained had long since given up any hope. To say that Jason was having a hard time was an understatement. Every day he faced a lot of problems, and he had forgotten his old life. No more partying until the wee hours of the morning, no more eating at expensive restaurants. Now, when he came home, he cooked himself a quick dinner and then sat down to study documents and reports for the last quarter. Only now he realized how deluded he had been, that he was familiar with every term in business. The reality was much sadder. At one point, Jason had given up and decided to give up, but then he immediately remembered the stern face of his father, who would once again prove him right. "No, I'll take it all for sure. There's no way out," Jason said to himself like an incantation. And today, going to work, he thought only of how to increase the firm's income and achieve financial independence. Even if it was small, it was still financial independence. The thing was that Paul Smith had told his son at once that the money injected into his company would be minimal, and therefore he should not count outside help. Jason got behind the wheel of his foreign car, drove onto the highway and headed toward the center. Fortunately, there was no traffic, and he got there on time, leaving the car in the parking lot. Jason picked up his briefcase and walked briskly towards the firm's building. At that moment, the young businessman's attention was attracted by a girl of about 6 or 7 years old, who was laughing and jumping happily next to a huge flower bed. Seeing the little girl, Jason was about to pass by when the girl asked him, "Uncle, I bet I can jump for 10 minutes and not get tired." Jason stopped and looked at the girl in disbelief. "Not likely. By the way, I don't have time to time it either. I have to go to work. But the fact that you can't is a fact." The little girl smiled. "You can't. I will definitely be able to. Want to bet on a wish or a weakness?" Jason smiled. Without wanting to, he had already taken the bait the little girl had prepared for him. He hadn't noticed that he'd gotten caught up in the argument, which had come out of nowhere. He glanced at his watch and said, "All right, let's check it out. Just be warned, the calculation will be real. If you lose, and you're bound to lose, I'll ask you to learn the biggest poem in the school curriculum. What's your name, anyway?" "My name is Emily, Uncle." "Jason." "Okay, let's get started before we change our minds," Emily said. Jason nodded, and the girl started. Frankly, watching this picture, he felt an unparalleled sense of mental comfort. Jason had gotten so sick of the whole business over the past month that he was glad for any opportunity to take a break from it, even through a simple argument with the little girl. Jason was also a gambler, and when Emily had approached him with a suggestion of an argument, she had hit the bullseye. As is the norm in a real contest, the stopwatch on her smartphone was turned on, and Emily started jumping. As the allotted time expired, Jason became more and more convinced that he had lost the bet. It seemed that the little girl could have bounced for more than 10 minutes, but could have broken the record for this type of athletic competition. "Yeah, good for you." There are simply no words. "I'll be honest, I didn't expect it," Jason said respectfully. "Thank you, Uncle. I've been practicing for a long time. Are you ready to pay your debt?" "I'll learn a poem for you anyway, so you won't be so offended," Emily said with a smile. "And what do you want?" "Money." "Sweets?" Jason asked with barely contained irony. Emily hesitated for a moment, then looked him carefully in the eye. "And my wish is this. Ask my mom out on a date, Uncle. Just this once." Jason shook his hands indignantly. "No way. Why just a date? Why don't you ask her to marry you or propose to her?" "I actually have a fiancée." Emily shook her head disappointedly. "Come on. I wasn't counting on anything anyway. All you rich people are the same. All you know how to do is lie." The girl's words disarmed Jason, and what he'd thought of as an innocent joke suddenly took on a different meaning. He didn't want to deceive the girl, especially since he could tell from her appearance that she'd grown up in a poor family. Trying to make it up to her, Jason mumbled embarrassedly, "All right. A bet is a sacred thing, as is a debt. I always pay my bills. Tell me what's what." A cute smile immediately appeared on Emily's face. "Okay, Uncle, but when you ask my mom out, go easy on her. She doesn't like you rich people very much." Jason nodded, and despite the limited time, listened to her confused explanations. Then he wished Emily a good day and gave her his word that he would keep his promise. He didn't know exactly how Jason would do it, though, so he decided to take a moment to think it over. The meeting with this girl had stirred up feelings in the businessman's soul that he hadn't even realized he had. For the next 2 days, Jason couldn't think of anything else but the upcoming date. He was aware that the whole thing was a hoax, a sham. "It's okay, I'll just go once, and then I can forget about this Emily thing," Jason told himself. On the morning of the appointed day, the little girl came up to him and said, "Uncle Jason, I've already arranged everything and warned Mommy, of course. I had to fantasize a little. But you'll forgive me, won't you?" The businessman smiled. "I forgive you, of course. You're doing your best for your mom. Do you want to make it better? Well, then come to the cafe at 6:00 p.m. The one around the corner. How will I recognize her? We haven't met, have we?" Jason wondered. Emily thought for a moment, then said, "Don't worry, you'll recognize her. She'll have a dress like this. It's all polka dots, and it's nice." "Yeah, you'll know right away." Jason smiled and pressed his hand to the left side of his chest in gratitude. The whole thing seemed like an adventure to the businessman, an adventure that would cheer him up and entertain him. And now, entering the cafe as a tramp, Jason felt an unparalleled excitement. A woman in a dress would appear, and he would have to play the part of the suitor for the evening. But no sooner had he crossed the threshold of the cafeteria than a guard blocked his path. "Where are you going? You must have the wrong address. This is not a social canteen. Don't even count on a free meal." Jason froze at the security guard's surprise and insolence. Then, forgetting he was wearing a hobo outfit, he grabbed his assailant by the lapel of his jacket. "What do you think you're doing, asshole face? What, you want a tip? I'll give you a couple of slaps and take you to your master by the ear. Then you'll know how to greet respectable people. You're the respectable one, all right? And God be with you." "Drink some, psycho," the guard hissed. Jason smiled victoriously and glanced at his reflection in the mirror. "Why am I so angry?" "Keep your voice down, be out of line," the businessman told himself. He didn't notice Emily's mom right away. As it turned out, she was sitting at the same table in the cafe the girl had mentioned. Jason came closer and said politely, "Good evening. My name is Jason. May I sit at your table?" The stranger smiled and gestured to a chair. "Have a seat, of course. My name is Jennifer." Jason was about to say something in response when a waitress came to their table and handed him a menu with a squeamish look. The disguised businessman took it in his hands and only now realized he'd forgotten to take cash. He had a bank card with him, and more than one. But how would he explain the unlimited card to the woman he was talking to? Jason blushed and realized he'd have to give up the expensive orders. Flipping through the menu pages, he tried to choose something more or less acceptable. "Why don't I order?" "It's no trouble at all," Jennifer asked with interest. Jason was ready to fall to the ground in shame. He held out the menu with a trembling hand and lowered his eyes guiltily. "Don't be embarrassed. It's okay. I'm paying." Other times you pay, and where even the woman added as gently as she could. Jason almost choked in amazement. Other times, what's she talking about? Is there going to be that second time with the order placed? Jennifer quickly turned the conversation to distract the tramp from the thought of payment. The speech was so proper and pleasant that Jason couldn't help but listen. Jennifer had told him everything about herself consistently and methodically. So Jason learned that she now worked in an office where she was constantly being abused. When the businessman heard this, he immediately became animated. Jason was about to make a job offer when he stopped short. "Where are you going in such a hurry? Have you forgotten? In real life, you're a wealthy businessman. Here, you're just a common vagrant, so act accordingly." The guy's mind raced. Luckily, Jennifer didn't notice anything and continued talking about herself. Jason was so engrossed in the conversation that he didn't notice the time passing. Despite her obvious desire to talk, Jennifer was reluctant to talk about the time period that had begun after graduation and had stretched to the present day. "What about Emily's father?" "And where is she?" Jason asked cautiously. It was an awkward question, and Jennifer's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "My husband left me. He'd left me for someone else when he found out his daughter had a congenital heart defect." That confession took Jason's breath away. "What does that mean?" "Emily's sick. But how does she jump ropes so fast? It's not healthy. We were very lucky. I was able to find the money for the operation. I don't remember anything about it. I don't really want to talk about it," Jennifer explained, catching the surprised look in his eyes. Jason nodded restrainedly, though he was in the midst of a storm of emotions. An ordinary cleaning lady had found such a huge sum of money to save her daughter. It was unbelievable. They talked a little longer, and then they were finally convinced of their sympathy for each other. The more Jason listened to her, the more he liked her. Jennifer seemed so natural and real to the businessman, like a young mother should be, even if she was raising her daughter alone. Toward nightfall, the cafe began to fill with people. Jason mentally thanked Jennifer for taking a table away from the entrance, so they could have almost complete privacy. Jason also decided that he would invite Jennifer back to the cafe, but only then would he pay for the entire order. Deep down, he regretted having agreed to the whole outfit. Emily had asked him to come dressed in a simple, plain outfit, but Jason had taken his fantasies a step further and turned into a hobo. Suddenly, Jason's attention was drawn to a group of young men who, laughing loudly, were already insulting the waitress. Out of the corner of his eye, the disguised businessman saw that there were 3 guys and 3 girls sitting at the table. One of them looked vaguely familiar. Jason took a closer look and was almost sickened by what he saw. It was Violet, his fiancée, who often cited a headache and refused to let him date her. She herself, openly deceiving the groom, spent time with friends. Not only that, but smiling and laughing, Violet kissed her companion on the cheek without embarrassment, as she had once done with Jason. He clenched his fists, his body tensing with resentment. In another second, he was ready to get up from the table and head toward the group. Sensing Jason's inner turmoil, Jennifer gently took his hand and tried to reassure him. "Come on, don't worry about it. What do they care? Their parents must be rich, so they make fun of those who are weaker. It's okay. Life will sort things out." Jason looked at Jennifer in surprise. How could she know such a thing when she'd spent most of her time working quietly in an office? He didn't want to offend her with that answer, though, so he quickly suppressed his anger and turned the conversation in another direction. But he couldn't forget the evening's incident, for he kept glancing at the table where Violet and her boyfriend were sitting. It was only a couple of days ago that she had been swearing her love to him, telling him of her impending marriage, which she was looking forward to. When it got dark outside, Jennifer started to get ready to go home. She paid the bill and then asked Jason to walk her home. "I can't stay any longer. I'm sorry, of course, but if you feel like it, we can meet again," she said. "I didn't really want to come to the cottage. She said you were like a recluse sitting at home, so I decided to give it a try. I don't regret it, by the way." Jason smiled. "Sure, I'll see you around. You don't doubt it. I really enjoyed it, too." Taking Jennifer's hand, the disguised businessman carefully led her toward the exit, trying not to look at the table where Violet and her buddies were sitting. Unfortunately, Jason didn't manage to maneuver out unnoticed, because one of the drunken young men immediately gave Jennifer an obscene compliment. Then he grabbed her arm. "Beautiful. Where are you going? Come join us, you won't regret it." "That's enough," Jason said through gritted teeth. "Let go if you don't want any trouble, and we'll just leave." The young man laughed cheekily. Then he got up from the table and shoved Jason roughly in the chest. He'd been standing half-turned the whole time, so that Violet wouldn't recognize him, but now he could stop pretending and respond to his assailant the way he deserved. Jason didn't wait for a second shove, and immediately slapped the rich man in the back of the head. The rich man staggered. Then his 2 buddies went into action. Violet recognized the tramp's features as those of her fiancé, Jason, who looked just like him. When the waitress saw that a fight was breaking out, she shouted loudly and then rushed to the front desk to call the police. The drunken majors dragged Jason outside, where the 3 of them began beating him. Jason turned around, kicked his assailants, and fought like an enraged lion. But still the forces were unequal. The most interesting thing was that Violet stood back and watched carefully, not feeling any pity for her fiancé. Jennifer, on the other hand, didn't abandon Jason and tried to fend off the attackers with her small purse. Soon the siren of an approaching police car sounded around the corner. The 3 friends scattered at once. Violet stayed where she was. Looking into Jason's bloody face, Violet snarled, "Yeah, I didn't think you'd trade me for this. Tell me, aren't you ashamed of yourself? I wonder what your father will say when he finds out his little boy is spending his evenings with a bum." Jason shouted something back, but there was no time to talk. He struggled to get up from the pavement and, supported by Jennifer, walked up the street. The cops didn't bother to catch up with the guy because they realized right away that he was the victim of the attack, so there was no point in detaining him. "So, do you know this girl?" "You know, the fiancée of one of those scoundrels," Jennifer asked on the way home. Jason gave a sort of inarticulate shrug, letting her know that he seemed to know, but not close enough to take her words seriously. "What did he mean about your dad? Didn't you say you grew up in an orphanage? Or did you know your father?" Jennifer persisted. Jason didn't want to talk about this awkward subject right now. He was waiting for a moment to step out of the shadows and into the light. Jason mentally promised himself that he would tell Jennifer the truth, but not now, not while his face was covered with blood and he looked like a beaten puppy. "If you're not offended, I'll tell you all about it later. When I come to my senses," Jason tried to change the subject. Jennifer nodded and didn't say a word the rest of the way. She was probably offended. Jason could feel it in his heart, but as soon as he tried to force himself to tell the truth, something inside him started to protest and prevent him from doing what he'd planned. As it turned out, Jennifer lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. She waved her hand and closed the gate behind her, dryly thanking him for a wonderful evening. And the overdressed businessman stood for a long time looking at her windows, in which the light was burning. When the lights finally went out, he realized that his mother and daughter had gone to bed, which meant he had to go home. Jason walked down the moonlit road and thought about how unpredictable life was. Yesterday, he'd been thinking about and preparing for his wedding to Violet. But today he'd learned something that made the thought of marriage seem repugnant. At least he had met a good woman whom he had fallen in love with at first sight. Not long ago he thought that all this would be an ordinary prank, an attempt to cheer up, to dilute the monotony of his life. Jason walked into the living room at midnight and picked up the smartphone on the table and saw several notifications. Jason hadn't miscalculated by leaving it at home, but had done it deliberately, because he knew that if it rang during the date, it would be very difficult for him to explain to Jennifer that he had the latest smartphone. The notifications came from Paul Smith, the father. Predominantly all of them were voicemail. Jason listened to them one by one and got a real shock. The fact was that Violet had called her father-in-law the same evening. She vividly described the meeting with Jason in the cafe. She told the businessman that his son, dressed as a homeless man, was meeting with a beggar. Paul Smith immediately decided that his son was broke and on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Despite this, the businessman still found the strength to call his son and find out what happened. "Tell me, please, do you have anything in your head, or are you completely crazy? I wanted you to take care of the firm's affairs, to become more serious, and instead you are fighting with your fiancé and preparing to marry some beggar," Paul Smith raged. "Paul Smith, stop it. Jennifer is not a bum. Violet's lying. She was in a cafe with some guy she was kissing and hugging. If I hadn't gone there to meet Jennifer, I don't think I would have known about it," he tried to justify himself. But Paul Smith wouldn't listen. He was ruled by an anger that only time could temper. Jason was well aware of that, so he put the conversation off indefinitely. That night, he didn't sleep much, thinking only of Jennifer and her daughter Emily. Then the businessman sadly realized what a mistake he had made by pretending to be a vagrant. After all, if he had come in his usual clothes, he could now help Jennifer with her work by taking her to his office, for example. Now, how would that look? Yesterday's tramp dressed in an expensive suit and offering his lady of his heart to mop the floor of his office. Jason was also afraid that Emily would talk and tell her mother the truth. He didn't fall asleep until morning, about half an hour before the alarm clock rang. He struggled to get his eyes open, feeling broken and tired from the day's events. Jason wasn't going to despair, because he realized that he was going to have a serious conversation with his father, and possibly something else to do with his company. As Jason left the car in the parking lot, he noticed Emily again, just as he had on the day of their first meeting. She was standing next to a flower bed, clutching a children's storybook in her hands. "Thank you, Uncle Jason. You've been a great help to my mom. You know, she's literally blossomed. I've seen that in movies, so I thought I'd try it in real life." Jason smiled. "Thank you too, sweetheart. I haven't had such a good time in a while," he replied with a smile. After talking some more, he asked the girl to ask her mom out again. Only now Jason knew that he wouldn't go back to the cafe and would limit himself to a walk in the park. "Okay, I'll be sure to tell her. You can be sure of that. Mom seems to be looking forward to it," Emily said. Jason walked into the office and began his usual routine. Unfortunately, he didn't know that one of Violet's acquaintances had blown the whistle on the fact that the owner had spent the evening in the company of a commoner. The role of Violet, who had been cheating on Jason left and right without shying away from her fiancé status, had been cleverly hushed up. Before the businessman could calm down and get into the next report, his father burst into the office. "What do you think you're doing, puppy? Do you know that I was counting on your marriage to Violet? After all, her father can help us in times of need, back us up, give us a shoulder to lean on. They say marriages like this are made in heaven, you know, and you let yourself have an affair on the side. How am I supposed to look Violet's father in the eye?" Jason looked down guiltily, then answered, "I didn't betray her. She did it all on her own. I just lost an argument and had to go to the restaurant, but now I don't regret it one bit, because I found someone close to my heart." Paul Smith shook his palm at the air. "You were a clueless kid, and you still are. Lost the argument. Duty of honor. You're supposed to be thinking about business, not your own ambitions. What have you turned this office into? Why are the floors so dirty? Don't you have the money to hire a cleaning lady?" "Why not?" "I do. She just quit without giving a reason, out of the blue. I'll put an ad in all the local papers today and come hang it out front," Paul Smith objected, grumbled some more, and then left. He didn't want to quarrel, especially since Jason had to make his own life according to his plan. How could he not? What kind of businessman would he be? A puppet without a voice of his own? And he'd be eaten up by the competition. There's a lot of sharks out there. You just gotta hang on. When his father left, Jason breathed out a sigh of relief and wiped the sweat from his forehead. It had gone a little easier than he'd expected. He instructed the secretary to post the recruitment announcement. Jason went back to studying the paperwork. Meanwhile, Violet was complaining to her father about her fiance's betrayal. "Can you imagine? I walk into a cafe with my friends, and there he is sitting with this beggar. But I made a scandal, as I should." Greg Johnson frowned. "I didn't expect that from Paul Smith. There's nothing to say, and I thought I'd back him up, stand up for him. They say there's an inspection coming from the region. They're going to shake them all down and won't rest until they've arrested someone. I think we already have one candidate. The main thing is to decide whether it's better to hand over the father or the son." Violet grinned happily. Jason, of course, let him know what real betrayal feels like. "And you won't feel sorry for him. You don't approve of the situation either, do you? What's there to feel sorry for? He's been messing with my head, and I've been suffering, dried up from love, and he wants new ones. And now I don't need him anymore. I have a better suitor. Someone with experience and ambition," Violet said with a meaning look at her father. "And who is this handsome man? Do I know him?" Greg Johnson asked with a surprised raised eyebrow. "Brian is his name. He's a guy with ideas not unlike this Jason guy. He's also got business experience. With him, we'll nail them in no time." Greg nodded, but he decided not to jump to conclusions. Time would tell him what was going to happen. If Violet wanted to put her abuser away, it would be a good idea not to get in the way. It would be a lesson to others. While Jason was working on the paperwork in the office, His secretary was surprisingly quick and immediately posted the job ad on all the internet sites in the city. The calculation was correct, and soon everyone who was actually meant to receive it knew about it. As it happened, it was Jennifer who was the first to respond, and she decided to come to the office immediately. As she approached the building, she suddenly felt an unparalleled excitement and trembling in her hands. Tears came to her eyes and her lips turned into a solid, thin line. Climbing the stairs was difficult, as if Jennifer were climbing the summit of Mount Everest. Opening the door, she stepped carefully across the threshold and found herself in a room that felt so familiar and cozy it took her breath away. "Did you want something?" the guard at the entrance asked. Jennifer flinched. Finally coming to her senses, she said, "Hello, I'm interested in a job. The ad says you're in need of a cleaning lady." "It does, doesn't it?" The guard lazily pointed his hand down a long hallway. "I think you should check with the director. Go straight ahead until you come to a brown door." "Thanks. I know where that is," Jennifer replied timidly and walked in the direction the guard pointed. What was her surprise when she saw her acquaintance from yesterday, Jason, in the chair in charge. "Jennifer, what are you doing here? Why didn't you give me a heads up?" the businessman exclaimed, blushing like cancer. "What am I doing? You'd better tell me. What's the meaning of all this masquerade? Did you want to laugh at my misfortune? I'm right to say that I sheltered a lonely mom and gave her hope. It's selfish. I'll give you that." Jason turned pale and jumped up from the table. "No, what are you saying? I was being sincere with you. It's just that Emily asked me not to wear expensive things, so I thought I'd better present myself as a hobo, and then it was a prank. I admit it, but I didn't mean to offend you in any way. And that girl in the cafe, that was your fiancée, wasn't she? Did I guess right?" "Yes, you did. Fiancée, but ex-fiancée. She betrayed me," Jason replied in a shaky voice. Jennifer paused for a moment, as if coming to her senses. Then she said something that made the businessman uncomfortable. "Did you know that I used to own this company? I ran it until one of the business partners named Brian betrayed me. Emily was 2 years old at the time. Her husband left her, and she was diagnosed with a heart defect. I trusted Brian, and after a few bad deals, he ruined me and drove me into bankruptcy." Jason ahead in amazement. And then what happened? Gone was the firm for next to nothing. Jennifer shook her head. Gave it away, of course. What was there to do with a small child in my arms and surgery? There was compensation, of course, but it was a drop in the bucket. Anyway, I sold the firm to Brian for pennies, paid off my employees. I waved goodbye to the business. That's how it is in life. Jennifer's confession struck a nerve with Jason. If only he'd known that his father had ignorantly bought the company from a second-hand firm. Hey, what was there to talk about now? "So what are we going to do now? Are you going to take me in as your cleaning lady?" Jennifer asked ironically. Jason's cheeks flared with embarrassment. "Oh, come on. What am I not going to get you a proper job? You seem to know the ins and outs of this stuff better than I do." Jennifer just waved her hand. She didn't want to dwell on the past. "I'll do whatever you want me to do," Jennifer added. Jason smiled and promised to find her a good place. At that moment, he realized once again that fate had set him on the right path. Meanwhile, across town, Violet and Brian were discussing a plan to punish Jason Smith. "Look, why don't we take the firm away from him?" "You're good at this," Violet asked. Brian thought for a moment and then shook his head negatively. "No, that's not good enough for me. I sold this firm to his father. I can't take it back a third time. I think that's enough. Let him keep the firm. But I could put him in jail." Violet's eyes flashed with joy. Her relationship with Brian had always been special, not just because he let her do whatever she wanted. Brian hadn't been there for her in that cafe, though he hadn't felt jealous. If Brian had been with Violet, he would have known that, ironically, Jason's companion was the same deceived woman from whom he had taken the firm and sold it to Paul Smith. Violet couldn't wait to punish her ex-fiancé as quickly as possible. She kept bringing up the same question over and over again, say how long before Jason gets into trouble. How much longer do we have to wait? Brian smiled. Soon, even sooner than you think. I've already put my people in his firm. Recruited them, so to speak. You know, money opens a lot of doors, and when the money's good, they'll carry you home in their arms. Jason enjoyed Jennifer's company as she brought him up to speed. With her phenomenal memory, Jennifer remembered everything she had once learned on the job. It wasn't long before Brian heard a disturbing rumor that a very savvy consultant had joined Jason's firm. I wonder who's so smart in the arena, the businessman wondered, puzzled the businessman. But when Brian found out exactly who was helping Jason, he felt uneasy. And they say you can't put a shell in the same funnel twice. That's bullshit. This is the third time you've hit the bullseye. Well, women are stupid. Jennifer's in the same hole again, Brian thought angrily, clenching his fists. With Jennifer's arrival, the firm's business had improved considerably. Of course, there were no million-dollar profits, and they could appear only after several months of fruitful labor without a single mistake and unreasonable spending. But keeping an eye on his son, Paul Smith could not help but notice changes in his company for the first time during his son's management policy. The firm's revenues began to exceed its expenses. In turn, Brian was not willing to give up so easily and wove his intrigue like the webs of a deadly spider. First, he needed to take Jennifer out of the game. But how to do that? No one knew the answer to that question. Brian thought about it for a few days, and then, slapping his forehead with the palm of his hand, said, "Why didn't I think of that before? It's so easy." It's infuriating. Violet looked hopefully at her boyfriend, realizing that he had obviously thought of something special. Brian got down to business. First, he hired a private detective to find Emily's birth father. To do this was not easy, because Michael Brown has had time to travel around the country, serving several prison sentences and bogged down in crime up to his neck. When Brian did meet with the ex-con, Michael initially refused to participate. "If I go after Jennifer, she'll put me back in jail. She'll also bring up alimony in arrears. No, I don't want to do that. She and I parted ways amicably. Jennifer keeps the girl, and I'm out of here." I was fine with that, he said. In response, Brian laughed in the rest of his face. "You're a fool. I'll help you. You hear me? You're not going to court by yourself. You're going to court with my lawyer. Your daughter is in Paris after all. So you're entitled to all the benefits her mother enjoys, especially since she's done nothing for you all these years. So it's time for you to claim your parental rights." Michael frowned. "How am I supposed to do that? No one will let me anywhere near the court. They'll say, 'Get out of here, you fucking recidivist.'" Brian smiled. "Don't worry, I'll help you. I'll get you a good lawyer. He'll draw up a statement for you. Get the certificates. Say you're on the path of correction and want to devote more time to your family, and therefore you intend to take your daughter back. Jennifer's going to get nervous and do reckless things. Meanwhile, we're going to nail her lover from every angle. Does that sound good to you?" Michael's eyes flashed with joy. Of course, he dreamed of getting revenge on his ex all these years. He hated businessmen of all kinds and always tried to humiliate or harm them on occasion. And Michael didn't like his new partner in crime. But there was something in Brian's eyes that attracted all kinds of scoundrels to him. Brian intended to strike at the family quickly, on several fronts at once. On the one hand, he'd send a network of inspectors to Jason and his father's firm. And on the other, he'd tie Jennifer up in a legal battle. As it happens, it was at this pivotal moment that Violet learned she was pregnant. Since she led a rather turbulent life, she could not say for sure who was the biological father of her future child. After weighing the pros and cons, Violet decided to tell her father that she was pregnant with Jason's child. The girl's calculations proved correct. Not half an hour later, the furious father promised to wipe out the Smith family in the near future. When Jennifer received the summons notice, her surprise knew no bounds. Oh my God, what's happened? Why do they want my Emily? And who made up that petition in the first place? It all came to light rather quickly. After seeing her ex-husband Michael Brown outside the courthouse, Jessica was stunned. He had changed and aged a lot in that time. His hands were covered in a thick network of wrinkles, and his missing teeth were replaced by dull steel crowns. "Well, hello there, dearie. You didn't expect me, did you? You've been rolling around like butter while I've been sunning myself," Michael grinned. Jennifer pressed her lips together resentfully. "And you still have the nerve to tell me that? Where have you been all these years? While I've been single-handedly raising Emily, running my business and finding the money to cure her. You don't know anything from there. You went along with that crook." Michael grinned. "What am I supposed to know? That you've been living here all this time?" Jennifer shook her head. Her relationship with her husband had been strained to the breaking point before, and now that they both had grievances against each other, communication seemed pointless. In court, Michael behaved the way Brian had taught him. He masterfully pressed on pity, telling the judge that he stopped with the criminal world and now intends to devote all of himself to raising his daughter. Michael's key arguments were the certificates obtained by Brian fraudulently. The cunning businessman got a few documents that Jennifer leads an immoral lifestyle, does not work anywhere, and goes to entertainment venues with dubious young men. It's all lies. "It's not like that," Jennifer tearfully cried out. But today the court was clearly not on her side. Stepping outside, Jennifer put her face into the cool breeze and quietly cried. At that moment, Brian walked up to her and put a hand on her shoulder. "So, now do you realize who's boss? My advice to you is to drop this Smith stand aside. Then you'll be able to survive and maybe keep your daughter. And if Emily ends up in an orphanage, you'll be disenfranchised for the rest of your life." Jennifer listened and couldn't believe it. Was this really happening to her here and now? In the 21st century, when, it seemed, lawlessness no longer had the same power over people as it used to. On the other hand, she couldn't just betray Jason like that, either. When she got home, she called him and told him the truth. "I'm sorry, Jason, but I can't help you anymore. I'm sorry, but my family is more important to me. I don't have anyone else." Jason nodded understandingly, not judging his beloved. What right did he have to do that? The next day, Jason received a 3-pronged inspection from the IRS, the fire department, and even the Environmental Defense Fund. It was the first time he'd ever had to deal with something like this, and he didn't know what to do first. Paul Smith also had a hard time because his business was also under a shadow, skillfully thrown by Brian. In addition, Violet's father, who wanted revenge for his daughter's dishonor, added his own spoonful of tar. In fact, of course, Violet didn't know exactly who she was pregnant with. Despite this, she continued to blame Jason for it. The pressure was so intense that the young businessman stayed up around the clock, trying to keep not only his business, but his father's business as well. Brian felt like a lucky chess player, arranging the pieces as he saw fit. The only thing the scoundrel hadn't considered. It turned out that Jennifer, having decided to meet her ex, had already told him the whole truth. She did not forget to mention how she was looking for money for Emily's surgery, and how Brian shamelessly deceived her, taking the firm. Strangely enough, the ex-wife's story had touched a nerve with the recidivist. Of course, he knew he had betrayed his family by abandoning them to their fate. But on the other hand, letting some businessman hurt his daughter Emily. Yes, Michael knew. He'd done no better himself, but he'd redeemed himself with jail time. And this Brian guy had basically tricked him and used him for his own ends. "I'm sorry, please. I realize there's no forgiveness for me. But at least let me do one last good thing for you. I don't have long to live. Tumor in the lungs. Inoperable Michael explained. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Michael, help me. You're my only hope." The recidivist nodded and left. 8 days after that memorable conversation with Jennifer, Michael stopped participating in Brian's scams and also made a statement in court that he deliberately slandered his ex-wife and became a hostage of other people's ambitions. The judge appreciated the recognition of the former recidivist and did not add him for this another term. That's when Brian's skillfully built front collapsed and scattered in different directions like a house of cards. Checks went out with nothing one after another, and Jason's firm had only gotten stronger, causing the stock price to skyrocket. When Violet's father saw this, he grabbed his head, but it was too late. Paul Smith would never reconcile under any circumstances, and he certainly wouldn't tell his son what to do. Realizing that he could not take Smith's business, Brian turned his attention to Violet and her father, intending to cover his own losses with the assets of their family business. The cunning con man miscalculated in small details as he acted very quickly and did not have time to analyze the situation. Greg Johnson's head of security was in his place and recognized the traitor just in time, preventing him from making a full turn. "So, did the traitor get his? Thought you could do to me what you did to that businessman you went to see?" Greg asked. After her father's words, Violet lowered her eyes guiltily, realizing that supporting Brian at this point was definitely not a good idea. Her father's bill for the damage was too much for the villain. Brian had gotten his money's worth, as the former businessman's reputation had been tarnished. He had to leave town in a hurry, where he was reviled by everyone he met. Jason and Jennifer, on the other hand, were celebrating a shared victory. It made it no less enjoyable. Emily sat next to him, looking happily at her parents.
Andrew walked briskly through the night streets of the city where his childhood and youth had passed. His heart was beating like a caged bird. Multicolored blotches flashed before his eyes, and his breath hitched, though he hardly felt. He wanted to be away from the restaurant sooner, where such a surprise awaited him. This trip was going to be a pleasant, easy one. A childhood friend, Kevin, had invited Andrew to the wedding. The man was surprised because he had long considered his friend a hardened bachelor. But then the wedding came up. Andrew was curious to see the woman who had managed to win over his freedom-loving friend. He was looking forward to seeing old friends, seeing his hometown, and reminiscing about the past. Of course, Andrew could not miss such an occasion. After all, it was a bright and warm event in a series of gray, everyday life. The man even took an unscheduled week's vacation at work to be in his former company. Andrew was a more than successful man, but he's had a hard time making it work. He lives and works in Moscow, managed to escape from the provincial town where he actually rushed to. But few people know that Andrew works on a rank-and-file position in not the most prosperous company, and every day spends at least 4 hours on the road to work and back. Because he lives far from the office, almost on the outskirts of the capital, in not the most prestigious neighborhood. His cramped 2-bedroom has long been in need of repair, but Andrew does not want to get involved in this epic. Why? He's fine as he is. Lives alone, only sleeps at home. What single bachelor needs all this beauty? And he's not ready to spend a lot of money on repairs. His salary does not allow him to live in luxury and allow himself to excesses. Personal life does not add up either. There are, of course, temporary romances, but it's not serious. Andrew mainly attracts ladies who need a place to live. At his expense, they can save on rent until they get settled in Moscow. Andrew sees perfectly well the intentions of such women. Looks, words, actions, all this gives away their true goals. Unpleasant, of course, but probably by the age of 35, it's time to realize that perfect, pure love may not exist. Everyone in a relationship is pursuing their own interests. When you were young, it seemed that one day the perfect girl would meet on your way. Beautiful, loving, intelligent, sincere, household and caring, but at the same time self-sufficient and able to occupy yourself when you go out with friends. One who will adore her spouse and be his or her rock-solid support. With such smiling beauty, Andrew dreamed of building a family and living happily ever after. Remembering his dreams, Andrew was amazed at his naivety. There are no fairy tale women or perfect relationships, as indeed in situations when everything in life perfectly suits. This realization came with time, and worse, as appointments awaited him at every step. In work, personal life, everyday life. How many hopes and plans he had for New York. In his youth, it seemed that it was enough just to leave his hometown, and life will shine with bright colors. Beautiful girls, great opportunities, lucrative job offers, fun parties, new friends. In fact, everything turned out differently. A small two-bedroom on the outskirts, in an old house, far from civilization. And for this modest apartment, Andrew is not yet fully paid off. Relatives helped with the first installment, which in his hometown could be used to buy a spacious home and make a luxurious renovation. But in New York, it was only a fraction of the cost of an old apartment on the top floor of a house without an elevator. Nevertheless, at the beginning of his journey to the capital, Andrew was full of hope and felt happy to have finally broken free. It was breaking free. That's how he felt, believing that everything would work out properly now. Freedom strengthened the prospects that were opening up, making his head spin. Andrew was glad that he had managed to end his past life. It seemed to him that it was a prerequisite for starting a new life, like a rebirth. Andrew left his mother, grandparents, friends, and Alex behind in his hometown. His relationship with her was beginning to take a turn for the overly serious. The girl, Andrew, of course, good, pretty, modest, caring, but the strength of her feelings frightened the guy, and anyway, how many such years he still has ahead of him, not to take her with him to New York. In the end, Andrew quickly found a job. There were indeed many offers, but they were not as tempting as the guy imagined at home. Igor, however, was not discouraged. He needed money to live and pay the mortgage. In addition, it is necessary to gain experience somewhere, because everything is still ahead, except that more than 10 years have passed and nothing has changed dramatically. Andrew was still working in low-paid jobs. To climb the career ladder, you need connections or great brains, well as incredible efficiency, love of work, passion for the cause. Igor had none of these things. He served working hours in the office as a duty, received at the end of the month a salary, most of which was given to mandatory payments. Rent, loans, mortgages. The rest of it he pulled until the next paycheck. Andrew always liked beautiful girls, bright as stars with long, slender legs, shining huge eyes, self-confident, witty, ambitious. There were certainly plenty of them in New York, but Andrew was not attracted to them at all. What could attract a young beauty to a dull office plankton, living from paycheck to paycheck? What could he offer such girls? Back in his own town, Andrew had once been an eligible suitor, the grandson of the head doctor of the local hospital, a student at a prestigious university. He felt he was the best of the best there. He had a lot of friends. Girls were looking at him, but Andrew always dreamed of more. He dreamed of the big city, thought he was worthy of a much better and brighter life than the one he had in his hometown. Andrew often spoke contemptuously about life in the province, called his small homeland collective farms and swamps. He assured me that he would never stay here. But he didn't. What's the use? What did he accomplish? First of all, Andrew's years in the capital have made him a liability in the form of loans. It's going to take him a long time to pay them off, and the salary in New York is still much higher than in a small town. Andrew realized that if he returned home, he would not get out of debt, and there was no one to help him now. His grandfather used to be an upstanding man, a respected and well-known man in the city, head doctor of the local hospital, but now he is on a well-deserved retirement. Sick, old, weak grandfather himself requires attention and care. And secondly, well, how is it possible to return after Andrew assured his friends that life in a small town is not for him? After scornful words about his small homeland. Okay, let's be honest. After bragging to his acquaintances, to admit to the whole city his failure and failure to admit his own insignificance, well, no, Andrew could not do that. Especially in the eyes of his old friends and relatives, Andrew was quite a successful and established guy. He lives in Moscow in his own apartment, works as an economist. The man diligently created an image of a man who was very satisfied with his life. Even in social networks, he put up photos which, in his opinion, supported the status of a... It is funny, of course, but sometimes the owner of the firm where Andrew worked organized corporate parties for employees. And on Andrew's page, after such festivities, appeared photos from luxurious restaurants. Once Andrew's colleague came to work in an expensive foreign car rented from his brother. Andrew took selfies behind the wheel of the car and posted the photo in his profile that evening, laughing at himself. That sort of thing. Andrew was making it look like he had a life he never had, and he was getting tons of likes and comments from people he knew from the town. They were convinced that Andrew had it all worked out. The ambitious plans of his youth had come true, and Andrew was happy with that. But at least in the minds of his friends and relatives, he would be so successful and happy. Andrew grew up without a father. His mother gave birth to him, as they call it, for herself. Or to put it more simply and honestly, she fattened him up. Andrew was the fruit of a banal resort romance student and a young man who introduced himself as the owner of a small business. Who really was his father, Andrew did not know and believed that now he will never know. This man, he does not even suspect the existence of his son, and, of course, has probably already forgotten about the affair that happened so many years ago. Or maybe he's not even alive at all. And then there's the mother. She knew nothing about her resort lover. It's simple. His mother did not plan a serious relationship with him. That's why she was not interested in the details of his life. She certainly didn't ask for his address and passport. She just wanted to have fun. She found herself away from the control and custody of strict parents, and in the end, it all turned out like this. Andrew was an unplanned but beloved child. His grandparents insisted that their daughter give birth, even though she kind of wanted an abortion. Andrew suspected it was his grandfather who kept him alive. Grandfather, after all, he is so authoritative, reliable, correct, and it is very difficult to argue with him. It must have been hard for him to accept the fact that his daughter had fathered a child out of wedlock. And yet the grandfather coped and made such an important decision for the whole family. The grandfather's reward was a grandson. He had dreamed of a son all his life, but in the end he got 2 daughters. The older of them gave her father 2 wonderful granddaughters, but the youngest made the most pleasant and long-awaited surprise, gave birth, finally, to a boy. Andrew's childhood was bright and happy. He was surrounded by loving relatives. His mother, however, much attention to her son did not pay. She was working or trying to organize her personal life, but Andrew still felt her love. His mother often gave him toys, took him to amusement rides or to the movies. She was a celebratory person, cheerful, energetic, full of ideas and plans. His mother charged her son with optimism and love of life, and his grandparents loved him. Andrew later realized that his grandmother felt very sorry for him. But how can a boy grow up without a father? And his mother doesn't do much with him. He just shows up once in a while like a ray of light and then disappears again. That's why grandmother tried to compensate for the lack of parental warmth and cooked for him delicious dishes, and read bedtime stories to him, and walked with her grandson for hours around the city, patiently going around all the playgrounds with him. Grandma's warmth, unconditional love, and complete acceptance. No matter what Andrew did, she was always at his side, even if her favorite grandchild was at fault. If Andrew was involved in a fight, grandmother unconditionally considered the other party missing bully who dared to hurt a good boy. If the grandson got a D, grandma turned on the teacher with her prejudice. Andrew loved grandma too. It was nice to know that there was such a person in the world for whom the light in the window, the best, the most beautiful and smart. Andrew had a different relationship with his grandfather. He did not particularly encourage dabbling. He could shout at his grandson and even give him an easy backhand under the wailing and groaning of his wife. Grandfather set limits, and that was good too, because it paradoxically gave Andrew a sense of security. Grandfather was solid as a rock. His words carried weight. He often had heart-to-heart talks with his grandson on a variety of topics: friendship, love, studies, plans for life. Grandfather had such conversations with Andrew from an early age, and the boy loved these moments. And grandfather often took his grandson to work with him. There, the boy saw how respectfully other people treated his grandfather and felt proud of his relative. Andrew realized that his grandfather was doing a very important job and doing it well. People are grateful to him. Grandpa took his grandson fishing and into the woods, and sometimes they spent the whole day in the garage, going through the insides of an old car. Andrew suspected that his grandfather could have bought a newer car, but apparently the faithful iron horse was dear to him as a memory. The older relative tried to compensate Andrew for his father's lack of attention as best he could, and he did it well. Andrew adored his grandfather and as a child dreamed of being like him. When Andrew was about 6 years old, he first saw a famous rock band on TV. and the boy was so mesmerized by the spectacle that he did not even hear his grandmother calling him to lunch. From then on, the boy never parted with a plastic shovel. He held it in the manner of a guitar and sang and danced just like the guys on TV. The adults laughed and clapped their hands. They were sure Andrew would outgrow his hobby. He didn't. At first, the boy just listened to rock songs. Then he started singing along. The grandmother was the first to notice that her grandson has an ear and voice and took him to music school. Within these walls, Andrew was disappointed because he had imagined everything quite differently. He thought the school had a stage and men in jeans with guitars. But the boy sat down at the piano and forced to learn boring scales. It was unbearable. Andrew hated school after the first 2 or 3 lessons. Like grandmother, always soft and pliable, suddenly showed firmness. She intended to make a musician out of her grandson, as his teacher assured the woman that the boy has talent and Andrew's sense of rhythm is innate. It turned out that Andrew's ear is marvelous. But laziness, according to the teacher, spoiled everything. Grandmother did not want to ruin Andrew's talent, so she forced him for 3 years to go to the hated music school. And then the boy still rambled and, not without the support of his grandfather, left the dismal institution. His grandmother regretted it for a long time about his behavior. She had already seen her grandson in dreams on the posters decorating the city about the arrival of the great pianist. But this was not the scene Andrew had dreamed of. Grandfather, who saw and understood everything, gave his grandson a real beautiful guitar for the new year. And Andrew somehow slowly learned to pick up melodies. Something looked at his favorite performers, to something himself reached, and he practiced diligently with a self-study book. Without many-weight, such studies. Without many-weight instruction, unnecessary lessons like solfeggio and literature, compulsory in exams. Now the boy spent hours in his room choosing compositions, and it worked. His father must have been musical, his grandmother sometimes said. "We've got a bear in our family. This one's a talent. You can see it in him." Andrew liked to imagine that his father was one of those rock musicians who packed million-dollar stadiums. He even looked for similarities between himself and the rock stars popular at the time. And he managed to find it. Once at school, Andrew studied not that very well, but without failures. His mother and grandmother initially dreamed that Andrew will follow in the footsteps of his grandfather, become a doctor. But by middle school, it became clear that the boy does not have the necessary aptitudes and abilities. Grandfather did not worry about it at all. He believed that everyone has his own way, and the task of adult relatives is to help the child to determine the future, to recognize his talent, which can later turn into a profession. None of the adults took his guitar playing seriously. That's why one day at the family council it was decided that Andrew would become an economics student. Why the profession is promising, monetary, the very thing for a guy. Andrew didn't mind, simply because he himself had no ambitions and plans for the future. When economist is an economist sounds kind of good. It's better to study at university than to go to the army. And in general, student life seemed to Andrew something like an endless holiday, a party, new friends and girlfriends. I can't wait. Andrew liked it at university. There seemed to be less control at once. It seemed that all the relatives suddenly recognized the only grandson and son as an adult. Grandfather even began to give more money for pocket money. Beautiful. Everything was exactly as Andrew had imagined. Parties, hanging out in rented apartments with visiting students, going to nightclubs. That's where the guy's guitar skills came in handy. It was great to sit in someone's kitchen and sing funny or even hooligan songs. Andrew, guitarist, was always the center of attention and was very proud of himself. Girls began to look at him, a good-looking, cheerful guy from a good family. At school, Andrew was somehow not distinguished by popularity, but at the university suddenly became an enviable groom. Of course, the guy took full advantage of this, had affairs, enjoyed his youth and freedom. Once, walking through the night city, a group of friends led by Andrew was in a rock bar. The guy did not realize that in his town there is such an institution. The bar was located in the basement of one of the houses in the center of the city. Unremarkable sign, minimal advertising. But inside it was a real treasure. Several not too spacious, cozy rooms with soft, comfortable chairs and photos of rock musicians on the walls, a long counter with high chairs and a stage with a microphone in the largest of the rooms. Local musicians and bands and soloists performed there every night. They played and sang both well-known songs and compositions of their own composition, Some kind of special atmosphere reigned here. The old-timers of the bar seemed to have known each other for a long time and formed a single, coherent organism. Andrew immediately wanted to become a part of it. This was the very element he dreamed of immersing himself in. From that moment on, Andrew became a frequent guest of the bar. He, catching his breath, watched the musicians' performances and then applauded them, making his palms literally burn with zeal. Together with everyone, the guy sang along with the performers, sometimes even allowed himself to dance, depending on the mood and atmosphere. Gradually, Andrew became like a native in the bar. He made friends with the musicians, and sometimes he was even invited on stage to perform between numbers. Playing for the customers, Andrew felt a back wave of energy from the audience. He liked it incredibly much. The guy aspired to become part of some musical group. After all, by this time, he had already had time to get acquainted with a considerable number of local performers. Performing concerts as part of a rock band had been his dream since childhood. But there were no offers of cooperation, and when Andrew himself tried to offer his services, he was always very politely and tactfully declined so as not to hurt his feelings. It seems that Andrew lacked some defining quality to realize his dream. Perhaps charisma, talent, or all at once. He had to accept the situation, but the musicians of the bar were still idols in his eyes, unattainable heights. He liked to be among them, to listen to their conversations, to help with preparation for performances. And it was in this bar that he met Alex. Andrew still remembered that evening, the last days of May, the time of university credits. As always, he was struggling because of his carelessness. During the whole semester, he neglected his studies, and on the eve of the session, he urgently began to try to catch up, to teach, to pay for retakes, and even to work off some debts. The teacher of economic theory agreed to give admission to the session to careless students in exchange for the repair of his classroom. Andrew single-handedly spent an entire day doing this work. The unaccustomed physical labor left him with aching legs and back. But the credit book now bore the precious, much-needed instructor's signature. After a hard day, Andrew decided to relax in his favorite rock bar. He went there finding himself alone. All his friends were busy. Someone went on a date because it was Friday. Someone was studying hard for a test, but Andrew wasn't upset. He had a lot of acquaintances at the rock bar, so he wouldn't be bored. No sooner had Andrew crossed the threshold than he was greeted by Ben, a familiar regular. He and a couple of friends occupied a corner table in the so-called sand room. Andrew gladly joined them, whilst the evening in the company of friends promised to be rich. Talking, joking, exploring the depths of life. However, everything changed with the appearance of Alex in the hall. A short, thin girl was dressed in a waitress uniform. Black short shorts, the same black t-shirt, a long gray apron, and a name tag on her chest. Her long brown hair was gathered into a high ponytail, and her face was adorned with a minimum of makeup. Indeed, she didn't need it. Black, widely spaced eyebrows, long eyelashes of the same color, peachy skin, and eyes of an unimaginable light turquoise color. It was this unusual combination of colors that caught Andrew's attention. "That's the new waitress. Just started yesterday," Ben mumbled, noticing Andrew's gaze. "Cute, I agree." Andrew nodded absent-mindedly. All his thoughts turned to the new waitress. He couldn't figure out what it was about her that had caught his eye. Yes, she was pretty, but he had met prettier girls. Some might say that she was too thin, as they say there's nothing to fight with. But Andrew didn't care about that. His eyes couldn't take his eyes off her. He couldn't tear himself away from her smile. It was radiant, yet humble, imbued with warmth. That smile lit up her face, making it even more attractive. It seemed to Andrew that he wanted to see that smile always. Moreover, he longed to be the one who caused it. He had never had that feeling before. That night, Andrew didn't find the courage to talk to the girl. It was not like him, because lately, the guy had been actively socializing and making new acquaintances. At school, he was really withdrawn and uncommunicative, but with the passage of time, everything changed. Now he had a pretty good experience in socializing. Still, when he was around a new waitress, he felt insecure again and became unusually quiet. One day, Andrew gathered all his courage and came to the bar with the sole purpose of talking to Alex. That night he came alone, without his friends, to whom he had taken himself to indulge in a quick state of economy class. Alex seemed tired or sad. At that moment, one of the visitors, not a regular guest but a casual passerby, expressed his displeasure. He complained that Alex had brought the wrong beer he had ordered, which caused him to complain loudly. The guest insisted on his own, refusing to accept the drink he ordered. In this situation, Alex looked confused. After all, she was now to return the drink, which was certainly unpleasant to admit in front of the receptionist. When "Lady, put that beer on my tab," Andrew stepped in, to Alex's relief. "And for this young man, bring what he ordered and paid for." Alex gave Andrew a grateful smile that warmed his heart. He was happy to help the girl and support her in some way. That evening, although they couldn't talk much because of the influx of guests, Andrew and Alex exchanged jokes and smiles. Something special was brewing between them, and the guy could feel it. Alex was not indifferent to Andrew either, and it was adorable. Unfortunately, the hectic work on the weekend left no time for talking because the waitress was too busy. When the end of the shift came, Andrew waited for Alex and offered to walk her home. It turned out that she lived only a couple of blocks away from the bar. The young people, holding hands, walked slowly through the busy city streets. They felt happy and peaceful at this quiet evening hour. They were silent at first, and it was not a tense, oppressive silence, but relaxed and calm. Neither Alex nor Andrew felt a shadow of embarrassment or awkwardness. Then suddenly, both of them started talking. At first, they discussed the previous evening and the performance of a local rock band, which consisted of high school graduates. Alex and Andrew agreed that the young musicians had everything ahead of them if they continued in the same vein. Finally, Andrew ventured into a more personal conversation. "Do you have someone?" he asked. "No, I'm single." Alex answered quickly. "And you?" Andrew couldn't answer this question unequivocally. He always had meetings, and now he, you could say, was dating a girl from the parallel group. A few dates had already taken place, but for Alex's sake, he wouldn't hesitate to give up all of them. Andrew was more and more attracted to this girl. "Tell me about yourself, please," he asked. "I want to get to know you better." For Andrew, it was a period of unknown sensations. He was happy and confused at the same time. Alex told about her life simply and sincerely. The manner of her speech, the calm and gentle timbre of her voice, the expression of her face, all this attracted Andrew incredibly. He liked everything about her, absolutely everything. It turned out that Alex was born and grew up in a village, almost 100 kilometers away from here. This cozy and quiet corner was not at all adapted to the life of young people. After finishing 9 grades, Alex went to the nearest city She entered a teacher's college. The choice of the profession of a teacher of junior classes happened not by the call of the heart, but because of the need to make a choice. After receiving her diploma, she tried to get a job in her specialty, but after a few months she realized pedagogy is not her way. Alex shared her memories. "I could not convey to these little people how to solve examples or write essays, although I can do it all perfectly well. But I couldn't teach and interest the kids. It's one thing to study in college and another to practice. It's heaven and earth." Alex didn't want to take on such responsibility, afraid to let the children down, to discourage them from learning. So she quit. She then worked for a while in a private developmental center. A young, pretty girl with a pedagogical education was welcomed with open arms. It was quite different from school. Here, it was not so scary to make a mistake or fail, and I always liked to take care of the kids myself. But then the center went bankrupt and closed. Alex found herself on the street. So I saw an ad for a waitress in a bar. So I answered it. "I'm so glad your center closed," Andrew admitted. "Because if it hadn't, we never would have met." Andrew and Alex began dating. Quiet, modest Alex with a dazzling smile and short stare finally won the young man's heart. And she herself, Andrew saw, felt, sensed it. Alex loved him with all her heart, with all her soul. She did everything to make Egior feel happy around her, even to the detriment of his desires and leisure. Andrew moved into Alex's rented apartment very quickly. They started living together. Andrew's relatives were not too happy with this fact, but what could they do? Andrew was already a very mature guy. What he wants to do, he does. Andrew was finishing his studies at the university. Alex was still working as a waitress. Her salary, his scholarship, plus monthly financial support from relatives made it so that there was enough money for the young people. Andrew, next to Alex, rested his soul. He felt that this girl accepted him with all his shortcomings. Moreover, she even liked these disadvantages, seeing in them, paradoxically, pluses. What eyes did Lyra look at him with what attention she caught his every word, and how many compliments Igor received when he played for his girlfriend on the guitar and sang to her. Next to Alex, Andrew felt like someone incredibly necessary, important, successful, almost perfect. It was very pleasant. And then Andrew didn't understand why. Everything started to change. Not all at once, but slowly, gradually. At first, Alex's care stopped warming his soul. Andrew somehow got used to her adoration, and Alex made him his favorite toast for breakfast, tried to please him with something special for dinner. And somehow it happened that the guy started to take it all as a norm. Alex didn't evoke the same feelings in him anymore. Admiration, interest, all of that disappeared. At first, Alex seemed a mystery to Andrew, so beautiful, quiet, modest. But her eyes gave away her bright nature. It's an exciting combination. But in time, the guy found out that there was nothing so special about Alex, an ordinary girl, even boring a little. Andrew, on the other hand, has always been attracted to extraordinary personalities. He was afraid of mediocrity, grayness, ordinariness. He even had his own idol, Samuel. He was about 10 years older than Andrew. By the way, Samuel had graduated from the same school Andrew had gone to. But to go to vocational school, where the road lay the road of most third graders in those years, the guy did not. He formed his own band and rushed to New York. There Samuel made a dizzying career. No, he didn't become a star of the first magnitude, but he still gained a certain fame. His rock band songs were played on the radio. The musicians gave concerts all over the country and even had their own army of fans. Samuel possessed a sharp mind and mad charisma. Andrew knew him personally. Samuel often came to their town because his parents lived here, and every time he went to the rock bar, where he was always a favorite guest, talking to old friends, listening to local musicians. Everyone here knew Samuel and loved him. Andrew considered himself a fan. He liked everything about the man. The open smile, the way he talked, the steady gaze. Samuel had amazing eyes, sad and thoughtful. He seemed to see through everyone he talked to with those eyes. Andrew wanted to be like Samuel. He even tried to imitate him, but he quickly realized that he couldn't do it. Samuel was a unique product, a star, a soloist, a leader. That night, Andrew went into the bar where Alex worked to meet some friends and listen to a new rock band. According to the stories of acquaintances, the newcomers showed great promise. The evening went on as usual, and close to midnight, Andrew felt some excitement in the... When he turned around, he saw them, Samuel and his buddies. Samuel was heading to his favorite table, nodding politely to his acquaintances. Andrew rejoiced. What luck! It looked like there would be no boredom today. Samuel was a man of celebration. Andrew decided that he would talk to Samuel today, secretly. In the back of his mind, Andrew still cherished the hope that one day Samuel would help him with his career, introduce him to the right people, and maybe even invite him to his band, at least as a backup, not as a core member. Samuel was living the life Andrew dreamed of. Touring, performing, rehearsing, partying, socializing with interesting people, beautiful girls, and, most importantly, the stage. Samuel literally gathered stadiums, excited crowds of people. Thousands of throats were singing along to him, and all eyes were fixed on him admiringly. If that's not happiness, what is? As Andrew finished his final year of university, it was as if he realized that he was no rock musician, that it might be too late to start. But every meeting with Samuel awakened his dream, gave him food for thought and a tiny ray of hope. Samuel was a risk-taker. After high school, he didn't continue his studies, but risked everything to pursue a career in music. And he'd been successful. Andrew sometimes wished he had been brave enough to take such a step. When Alex was serving Samuel's table, she smiled at him just like all the other customers. But Andrew's eyes were now fixed on his idol, full of hesitation and unspoken aspirations. He looked at her and occasionally said a word or two to the girl. Andrew didn't hear these phrases, but judging by the expression on Alex's face, it was something pleasant. Andrew, to his surprise, suddenly realized that he didn't like seeing his girlfriend chatting nicely with Samuel, and this was clearly not about jealousy. Andrew realized that Samuel was surrounded by beauties of all sorts, ready to do anything for him. Why would he want a country girl, Alex? Yes, he did. Now that Andrew had lived with her for a few months, he could see that. There was nothing special about her looks. The guy himself didn't understand why he was attracted to her. Andrew was uncomfortable with the fact that he was not the one chatting sweetly with the star. He had to wait patiently for a convenient moment, while Alex was calmly talking to Samuel right now and doing it so casually and naturally, as if she didn't realize who was in front of her. Or maybe she really didn't. A few more hours passed. Andrew decided that it was time to talk to his idol and headed to his table. At the same moment, Alex rushed to Samuel with an order, and this collision inevitably happened to Andrew. No, Alex held the beer glasses. Nothing even spilled out of them. The girl's good reaction saved the situation, but Andrew still couldn't resist an irritated remark. An elephant in a china shop. This expression flew out of his mouth automatically, the same words his mother used to bail him out with when he dropped or broke something. Alex was embarrassed. She was uncomfortable that Andrew was emphasizing the attention of those present on her blunder. If it weren't for his caustic remarks, perhaps no one would have noticed anything. Well, why would you do that? Samuel intervened, smiling encouragingly at Alex. What kind of elephant is it? It's a very sweet and fragile young lady. Andrew looked angrily at Alex. After these words of Samuel, she suddenly became even more annoyed with him. The girl, sensing this, backed off. The rest of the evening went great. Andrew had a great time in the company of Samuel and his buddies. It was interesting to listen to their stories about their turbulent youth and concerts in the capital. What a lot of trouble they got into in their time. You could make a whole movie. Andrew liked to feel himself a part of this company, even if only for one evening. These people lived bright, loud, and laughed heartily. Alex's shift was over. She walked over to Andrew, calling him home. Usually they always came back from the bar together. He just waved her off. He couldn't be bothered with her right now. "Is that your girlfriend?" Samuel asked her. "More like an admirer," Andrew said, not caring a bit about Alex's feelings. She was standing right next to him, and she'd heard everything. But the guy didn't care about that. He didn't want Sokolovsky to find out that Andrew was in a serious relationship with a waitress. "You're lucky." "I wish I had a groupie like you," Samuel said, winking at Alex. She smiled sadly and went to the staff room to change. She was already very tired and wanted to get home as soon as possible. Andrew showed up at the apartment where he had been living with Alex for months. Early in the morning, he thought that Alex would give him a scandal, or at least demand an explanation. He behaved with her very ugly. He called her an elephant and didn't admit to others that she was his girlfriend. But Alex herself looked guilty. She didn't say a word to Andrew. And then, when he spoke up, she acted like nothing had happened. She looked at the guy with the same love, tenderness as before, and cared for him the same way. Alex's admiration and attention, which before were perceived as a gift of fate, now irritated and seemed to be the girl's advantages recently turned into her disadvantages. Care into obsession, unnatural beauty into rustic simplicity, modesty into stiffness. And yet Andrew was in no hurry to part with Alex. He was comfortable with her. Alex provided him with lodging, cooked delicious meals, even ironed his shirts. And at the same time, she didn't control every step of the guy as his relatives did, for example. She didn't demand reports, didn't limit him, didn't blow his brains out with talk about the future. With her, Andrew lived much freer than in his native house with his grandmother, grandfather, and mother. But Andrew dreamed of more. He saw himself as a successful, established guy, next to whom a bright girl with a model appearance, not Alex from the village. The guy was looking forward to graduating from university to finally move to a big city and start a new life in the future. He didn't see Alex around him. She was just a way station for him, nothing more. But Andrew's plans were almost ruined by a ridiculous accident. "We need to have a serious talk." These were the words Alex once met Andrew from the university. He had just sat through 5 consecutive classes. Accordingly, he had neither strength nor desire to communicate with the girl. "Okay," Andrew sighed. He realized that he had no way out. I'm expecting a baby," Alex bribed with a look. She was obviously feeling very embarrassed. Andrew felt like he'd been doused with a bucket of cold water. "What do you mean?" "I don't understand." "What's there to understand?" "It's simple. I'm expecting a baby. Are you sure about that?" Andrew asked with hope in his voice. "I can't be more certain." "That's a twist." What about New York? What about Andrew's plans and dreams? Now it was all over. Andrew tried to talk Alex into terminating the pregnancy. He told her it was too soon for them to be parents. A baby needs a grown-up mom and dad, and they're just kids. "I'm not ready," the boy honestly admitted. "What kind of father am I? I haven't even finished university yet." "I understand everything." Alex sighed heavily. "You don't have to worry. The girl looked so unhappy, so confused. And how could she be alone? Andrew knew perfectly well that Lyra couldn't handle it. He also knew that he wouldn't leave her now, or rather, he wouldn't abandon his child. Ever since he was a child, he had heard unflattering things about his own father. This man could not have known about his son's existence at all, and still turned out to be a scoundrel for not taking part in his upbringing. His grandfather, mother, grandmother, all together they managed to firmly hammer into Andrew's head a simple rule. You cannot abandon their children under any circumstances. Anyone who does so is unworthy of respect, love, and a happy life. It's the gravest sin a man can commit. And now Andrew finds himself in almost the same situation as his father once was. He is pregnant with a girl with whom he was just having fun, not planning a serious relationship. Only unlike his father, Andrew will not be able to dissolve in the vast expanse of his homeland, and he will not escape the consequences. No, of course, Alex won't go after him. She's not lying when she says that she's going to raise the child, but Andrew's conscience won't allow him to remove himself from the situation. Well then, we'll get ready for the wedding. Andrew sighed and squeezed out a semblance of a smile. Well, now we can't keep water in a sieve. We'll have to adapt to new circumstances. If you think about it, Alex wasn't the only one to blame for the situation. He, Andrew, had a part in it. Alex, of course, is not the limit of his dreams, but it is possible to live with her. She's economical, quiet, caring. Probably a good mother, too. And New York? It can wait. It's not going anywhere. Andrew's going to get his way. The boy honestly tried to console himself with these thoughts. So what if it's a baby? The main thing is that it should be born in marriage. Decency will be observed. And then you can get a divorce. And realize the old plans. You'll have to pay alimony for 18 years. But that's no problem. Andrew will have such an income that these mandatory deductions will not do him any good. Alex put her arms around Andrew, pressed herself against him. I knew you were reliable and that you could be trusted. Earlier such words filled Andrew with energy and joy. But now, hearing them from Alex, the guy felt only heaviness. Instead of being happy about her trust, Andrew felt as if he had an anchor tied to his leg. He remained silent. Andrew introduced Alex to the in-laws. It was inevitable because of the upcoming wedding. Alex easily won their hearts, especially her grandmother, who never tired of repeating that Andrew was extremely lucky. But the more people around him rejoiced at the upcoming event, the more he felt trapped. His dreams and plans for a new life somewhere far away from here seemed shattered. All because of Alex, because of this unexpected pregnancy and imminent wedding. Now that he had finally received his cherished diploma, instead of striving for new horizons, he found himself bound by circumstances here in this small town. Alex was still working at the bar, and Andrew had decided to take a short vacation after his studies. He knew he had the responsibility of supporting a family ahead of him when Alex went on maternity leave. He reasoned that he was entitled to a short break before a new phase in his life. At the rock bar, where he now spent more and more time with friends, Andrew looked enviously at the young musicians. He realized that many of them could stay in this forgotten town forever, and some, like Samuel, had great futures ahead of them. Watching them, Andrew realized that he could have done things differently with his life. A man only lives once, and he doesn't have time for unloved causes and people. But commitment seemed to hold him captive like a snare. In the back of his mind, he wanted to scream in despair, seeing his prospects in life not working out the way he wanted it to. But his friends did not guess anything. Andrew skillfully hid his true feelings. They thought the guy was just a little nervous about getting married and having a baby. That's normal. Andrew didn't try to change their minds. Suffering alone and desperately hoping that things could still catch up, not now, later, in a couple years. His plans weren't overridden, just put on hold for the time being. As long as this swamp doesn't swallow it up. It was on one of those nights at the bar, when Alex stayed home and Andrew enjoyed some freedom, that he met Scarlett. Tall, dazzlingly beautiful, long hair falling in waves down to her waist, tight jeans revealing her flat stomach. She showed up surrounded by her girlfriends. They were also pretty girls, but all their virtues paled against Jean's beauty. Andrew hadn't taken his eyes off her since she appeared in the hall. He was not the only one, by the way. His friends had already left, but Andrew was still sitting at the table, drinking beer and watching. He liked everything about her. Her smile, her loud laughter, her gestures. Scarlett was clearly a leader among her friends, and in general in life it seems. The girl caught Andrew's eye a couple of times, and then a small miracle happened. She invited him to her table. Most of her friends had already left by that time. 2 silent girls remained, who did not interfere with the conversation between Scarlett and Andrew.
In the course of the conversation, it became clear that the young men had much in common. Scarlett was a couple years younger than Andrew and had also been raised without a father. Grandmother and mother insisted that the girl after school entered the law school of the local university, and Scarlett herself, as long as she can remember, dreamed of becoming an actress. She was attracted to the stage, creative environment, metropolitan life.
"You're really going to be a great actress," Andrew assured the new acquaintance sincerely. "With that kind of appearance, terrific. You'll have directors fighting over you." "Thank you." Scarlett smiled without the slightest embarrassment. "I think so too. But I wasn't ready to argue with my mom and grandma at that age. Not like now." Scarlett had listened to her older female relatives at first, and then as she grew older and stronger, she declared that she was an adult and would no longer allow herself to be manipulated and in charge of her own life. "Anyway, today I picked up my documents from uni. I'm not going back there again. In a couple of days, the train, and I'll leave for New York forever. Even if I don't become an actress, I'm not coming back here again." Andrew looked admiringly at the girl. How wonderful she is. Scarlett, unlike him, didn't betray her dream despite external pressure. She wasn't afraid to drop out of college and go to Newark into the unknown. She's like Samuel in that way, and Scarlett is bound to win. With that kind of looks, character, and assertiveness next to this girl, Andrew suddenly thought himself worthless and cowardly. But this unpleasant feeling did not last long because Scarlett suddenly kissed Andrew. Andrew was dizzy with surprise. Is this for real? Such an amazing girl liked him?
"You're awesome," Andrew informed Scarlett, pulling her slightly away. Huge brown eyes resembled two dark eyes. Someone could so easily drown in them.
"Why don't you keep me company? Come with me to New York. It feels like you're cramped in this city too. It'll be easier on the two of us." Andrew was dumbfounded and stared at his beautiful interlocutor. She sensed him so subtly, knew everything about him at once. "That's amazing." "Yes, of course," he nodded. "I'm with you." The moment Andrew said it, he genuinely thought he'd deal with problems like Alex and the wedding. He'd figure something out later. Well, he couldn't say no to such an amazing girl. Andrew might never meet another girl like her again. Probably never, because there's definitely no one else like her. That night, Andrew left the rock bar with Scarlett. She was driving her own old foreign car that her grandfather had given her for going to law school. Scarlett drove the car delightfully, beautifully. Andrew admired her confident movements and slim profile all the way. And now they were outside the city, in some deserted field, a deserted place. Scarlett stopped the engine, turned to Andrew and smiled. How could they resist? They met the dawn, lying in each other's arms on the sprawled-out seats. But that moment Andrew had no doubt. He would break up with Alex. He wouldn't give up the baby, of course, but there would definitely be no wedding. Telling Alex the truth wasn't easy at all, but Andrew wasn't going to cheat either. Why is that? He's not doing anything wrong. He met someone else, fell in love. That's just the way it happens. Andrew isn't Alex's property. He's a free man who's free to do with his life as he pleases. But Alex looked at Andrew with eyes that held hope, adoration, love, and tenderness. Looking into those devoted eyes, it was hard to tell the truth. Andrew felt like the ultimate scoundrel as he directly shared the news with his ex-fiancée. "Alex, it's like she passed away," as if Andrew's words had caused her physical pain. Tears came to her eyes. "Are you in a hurry? You don't know this Scarlett at all, do you? Beautiful girl, you're young. I can understand it all. A fling. But why take it out on me? If you want New York so badly, let's go together. There's nothing keeping me here anyway." Andrew felt anger boiling up inside him. That woman doesn't understand anything at all. He wants to go to New York to start a new life, the one he's dreamed of for so long. Maybe even make it as a rock musician. If it doesn't work out, he'll work in his newly acquired specialty. New York is a city of opportunity. No way he wouldn't have the load of an obsessive Alex, and he certainly didn't need a baby there. Alex cried, begged, apologized. Andrew never realized why. The guy was angry, insulted the girl, trying to hurt her. He realized that he was being cruel to Alex, but angry words were his way to break the connection with the annoying girl, to turn her away from himself. And so, Andrew found himself on a new round of his life adventures, leaving the familiar world, hopes and perhaps illusions for the dream of a future, which he imagined much brighter and more intense. At the same time, his actions and decisions were not exempt from the guilt and burden of responsibility he felt toward the child. Andrew tried to convince himself that his decision was not an escape, but a step toward finding himself, toward being able to live the life he chose for himself, not the one chosen for him. However, the road to self-discovery and self-realization is rarely easy and cloudless. He had to go through trials and possible loneliness, being away from his familiar surroundings, from the sometimes heartwarming comfort of home, relationships in which, despite conflicts and disappointments, there were moments of sincerity and warmth. And the journey into the unknown with Scarlett was full of expectations and hopes. Common dreams and goals brought them together. But only time would tell if they would be able to pass all the obstacles together, if they would retain the strength and devotion to each other that seemed so obvious and unshakable at the beginning of their journey together. Imagining what will become of his life in a few years is a kind of mental test for Andrew, a test of maturity and the ability to take responsibility not only for his own life, but also for those he leaves behind. Perhaps there will always be a place in his heart of regret for the path he has chosen, and at the same time, pride in the courage to live his own way.
One of the most difficult questions Andrew finds himself facing is how to be a good long-distance father and how to stay connected to his child despite the circumstances. He envisions his future in the big city as a time of great opportunity, but also as a challenge in which he will have to learn how to combine personal aspirations with caring for his loved ones.
Andrew leaves behind not only the past, but also a piece of his heart, with the hope that in time he can find a way to reconnect with its inhabitants without losing himself and his dreams. The grandfather put aside a tidy sum of money for his grandson's account each year. It was, in his opinion, the necessary startup capital for every man. And now, when this money was needed, it came in handy. With this money, Andrew was able to rent an apartment for himself and Scarlett. They lived on it for the first time, while they still had to find a job. His grandfather, grandmother, and mother constantly sought to contact Andrew. They were probably anxious to express their dissatisfaction with his decision. It seemed to them that they could somehow influence the situation, maybe even force him to return home. However, the young man ignored these attempts at communication. He explained everything to his relatives in a letter and preferred not to have any conversations with them until they were calmer. Time will sort things out. After I get a job and get settled, I'll have a chance to do something nice for them. We'll talk then, Andrew reasoned. Scarlett thought Andrew was doing the right thing. Often parents and relatives, without even realizing it, put obstacles in our way. They try to force us to live according to their ideas, to conform us to their expectations. But we are not their property. Each of us has the right to make our own lives. Andrew fully supported Scarlett's every word. Unfortunately, their relationship didn't last long. Soon Scarlett found a rich sponsor in the capital and immediately left Andrew for him. Such a betrayal caused Andrew great pain. He was sure that he had found his only one who understood him like no one else. It seemed to him that together they could overcome all difficulties. But that's not what happened. Nevertheless, it was impossible to give up. It was necessary to take measures to settle in a new place and find a better paid job. Coming back was out of the question. After a month and a half of fruitless searching, Andrew finally got lucky. He was hired as a junior economist in a company that, although not particularly successful, had stability. The guy took it as the start of his way to a successful and prosperous life. However, more than 10 years have passed, and there were no significant changes. Andrew still occupied not the most prestigious position and practically did not move up the career ladder. Prospects seemed rather dim. Nevertheless, when he got the job, he still called his mother, ready for a serious conversation. He expected reproaches and possible demands to return, but his mother's reaction was unexpected. She wondered how he could have done this, not only to them, but to Alex. His relations were predictable, but his mother's next words shocked Andrew. Alex was so distraught over the alleged betrayal that she lost her baby, ended up in the hospital. She was barely saved. And then Andrew learned that calls had been made to inform him of Alex's condition, but he had never answered. This news stunned him. Despite everything, learning about the loss of his child did not make him feel relieved. On the contrary, it triggered a painful mixture of feelings: disappointment, pain, and longing.
Strangely enough, Andrew was able to get through it. Now it seemed to him that it was even easier to turn the page and start life anew. Andrew worked hard, saving money. His life was full of reports and traveling from the office to home. He had no time for entertainment, new acquaintances, and even less for relationships with girls. The guitar, which he once loved, was now covered in dust in the corner, as there was no time to play and, most importantly, no desire.
After a couple of years, Andrew managed to take a mortgage on a small apartment in an old house in a remote area without repairs, but his own. Relatives helped with the down payment. The guy sincerely rejoiced at this achievement, believing that the beginning has been made. But again, time passed and nothing changed. Andrew lived in a tiny 2-bedroom on the outskirts of the capital, spending a lot of time on the road to work, pulled money from paycheck to paycheck, saved on everything, and only in social networks on his pages carefully created the image of a successful man. It seemed to be working out pretty well. Andrew knew that his friends and relatives from his hometown were watching him. Let them think that their fellow countrymen had succeeded. Andrew's personal life didn't work out. No, he had the occasional fling, but these ladies were all the same. They were from out of town like Scarlett. They needed a place to stay for a while. Andrew's apartment was used as a staging post. The man was well aware of that, and now he remembered Alex with longing and nostalgia. Her care, tenderness, love, sensitivity, attention, respect. Next to her, Andrew felt like a king. She gave him the feeling of wings behind his back. And the others, they were always just using Andrew. The man understood this perfectly well and agreed. Where could he go? Then, in his youth, Andrew thought that he would have many more like Alex. Only with the years he realized that strong feelings and sincerity in relationships, a great rarity, but nothing could be taken back. Andrew was very happy to receive a call from his old friend Kevin. They had been together since high school and until Andrew left for New York. Life, of course, divorced the buddies in different directions, but they were still connected by many things. Warm memories, shared childhood and youth. All this does not disappear without a trace. Now it turns out Kevin has decided to settle down after all. He is about to have a wedding, and he invites to the celebration of a childhood friend who now lives in New York. But Will the Muscovite in his busy schedule will find time for an old friend. It's been ages since we've seen each other, and this is the occasion, Kevin said. This half-joking phrase has once again convinced Andrew that he is considered quite an accomplished and happy man.
The social media activity was not in vain. Andrew had never visited his hometown in all those years. His mother, grandmother, and grandfather came to visit him several times. And Andrew, for some reason, he didn't feel like going, but now the situation had changed.
The man suddenly felt that he was ready to see his small homeland again, to meet old friends, for whom he is a successful economist from the capital, to walk along the streets familiar from childhood, to look into a rock bar, to feel himself not a gray loser, but a capital guest who managed to get out of the wilderness. Of course I will, Kevin, he thought. Andrew arrived in his hometown in the late afternoon. He didn't take a cab, but decided to walk. Not much had changed here. The same dusty stretches of highway, the same sidewalks, the same lush greenery. Familiar streets, parks, squares surrounded him everywhere. A strange feeling swept over the man. He longed for his past self, young, full of plans and hopes. It seemed that he was not like the others. The others would stay in town, but he, Andrew, would become someone great like Samuel. A man the locals would be proud to know. But not everything works out the way he wanted. Sure, Andrew lives and works in New York, but it's not what he once dreamed of. True, the locals don't realize it. At least for 1 week, Andrew will be able to feel like the person he wanted to be when he was young, he thought. And that made him happy. The family greeted their son and grandson joyfully and warmly. They hadn't seen each other much lately. Grandmother and grandfather had become quite old, and once they had seemed energetic and all-powerful to Andrew. Time spares no one, and Mom was not the beautiful and young woman she used to be. Andrew felt sad at the thought that they were the only people on the entire planet who cared about him. He didn't even want to think about the days when they would be gone and he would be all alone. The next day, Andrew met Kevin and his fiancée at a cafe. Emma turned out to be a very pretty and pleasant woman. Kevin didn't let go of her hand. It was obvious that the friend was in love with his companion with all his heart. Under Emma's blouse, he could see a neat tummy. So that's it. Kevin is going to be a father soon. That's news, Andrew thought. He reflected on the fact that he'd have a teenage child by now if it weren't for, who knows, maybe if that baby had been born, Andrew would have come back from New York to him when he realized things weren't working out in the capital. Maybe he would have proposed to Alex and they would all have been together living a big and friendly family. I wish I had realized then in my youth. Here it is. Happiness itself came into my hands, and I kept chasing the mythical crane in the sky. The friendly reunion went great. Andrew and Kevin were joined by their old buddies. They sat and discussed the details of their upcoming wedding and laughed a lot, just like when they were kids and young adults. Andrew's friends were all married, solid men. Some had grown a belly, some were beginning to gray. Grown family men, all just as fun as they used to be. Then Kevin and Emma went home, and Andrew and his friends went to an almost native rock bar. Here, to the man's relief, almost nothing had changed either. The buddies came in here periodically. They still remained their own here, which was very warming to the soul. Andrew diligently played the role of a successful Muscovite, treating his buddies to a beer and telling them about his life. He didn't lie, of course, but he presented the facts in such a way as to preserve the image of a man who had managed to realize the dream of his youth. "Well done, Andrew," declared the friend, clapping the man on the shoulder. "As he always said, when you were young, you'll achieve more. And here you have done it. We're all even a little jealous of you here." Andrew smiled at his friend and remained silent. If he knew exactly what he was jealous of, the next day was the wedding. Andrew arrived at the appointed time. A crowd of dressed-up guests, the newlyweds' adult relatives, and their friends all gathered together. Andrew was even at first confused by such an abundance of strangers. Then his friends called him. All of them came to the party with their other halves. Family, serious people. They all had kids, jobs, apartments, cars. Looking at his old friends, standing on the arm with their wives, Andrew once again felt that his life was passing aimlessly. Solemn registration, obligatory promenade with a photographer to the memorable places of the city. Champagne was flowing. The guests cheered, laughed, showered the newlyweds with compliments. Kevin and Emma really looked beautiful in love, happy. Then it was the restaurant's turn. Andrew had relaxed by then and was getting to know everyone he didn't know. The guests treated him warmly and friendly, asking about New York, talking respectfully about Andrew's career. Everything was exactly as he had imagined. In the restaurant, the dressed-up crowd was already waiting for the host of the evening, a cheerful, smiling guy. A new batch of guests had gathered on the porch. This is where Andrew got a surprise he couldn't have imagined. Among the crowd of newcomers, he saw Alex. At first, the man couldn't even believe his eyes. "I thought I was imagining things. But why would she be here in the first place?" Alex had changed, of course, during this time, but not so much that Andrew didn't recognize her. The same huge turquoise eyes, long, slightly wavy hair. Slender, touching, almost transparent. Only now there was a confidence in Alex's gaze that made her face even more attractive. Alex was wearing a flowing dress of a marvelous emerald shade, which suited her eyes so well. Her hair was beautifully pinned up in a way that revealed her beautiful face and spread over her graceful shoulders. She looked much younger than women her age and radiated warmth and energy. Andrew could feel it even from a distance. "Is that Alex?" Andrew turned to his buddy standing next to him. "What's she doing here?" "Alex. Kevin invited her," the buddy replied. Andrew grinned. He wasn't very helpful.
At that moment, Alex noticed him too. Their eyes met, and Alex smiled. That beaming smile had a strange effect on Andrew.
How could he forget this radiant, warm smile, illuminating her face with some special light? But, on the other hand, anger suddenly rose in his soul. For some unknown reason, he suddenly made her Alex, the culprit of his not-so-successful life. Alex, years ago, was just plain obsessive. She was annoying, demanding his attention, and unwilling to give him any freedom. It was from her that he had decided to leave for New York before he was fully ready to do so. Now he's decided it's all her fault. And now Andrew was forced to live a miserable existence, and Alex came to the wedding. So beautiful, successful, and confident, smiling at him with a sense of superiority. Andrew nodded dryly to Alex and hurried to disappear into the crowd. The festivities were not so pleasant now. From his seat, Andrew watched Alex having fun, easily talking to the guests, laughing and dancing. She apparently knew many people here, and them were asking her to dance. The young lady was undoubtedly a success. Strangely, she'd come to the wedding alone. Kevin invited her. Why would that be? Andrew's thoughts tried to find an explanation. From afar, it seemed to him that Alex's life had turned out well. She wore seemingly modest jewelry, inconspicuous earrings, and a thin necklace. But he was well aware of how much it cost. A fortune. The same could be said about the shoes. from a famous brand with a signature red sole. Alex didn't look like a resident of their town at all. She looked modest, but expensive and refined. Unlike the local ladies who liked to show themselves in all their glory for celebrations like weddings. Bright makeup, ostentatious clothes, elaborate hair, Alex stood out against their background, and it pissed Andrew off. It seemed to him that Alex looked at everyone from the level of his superiority, including him. Andrew wanted to bring Alex down to earth, showing her arrogance, and show her who she really was. A simple girl from the village, a former waitress, whom he had left years ago, not wanting to connect his life with a girl from the countryside. It seemed to him that he shouldn't act like an unchangeable queen here. After all, at this wedding, the couple's guest was him, Andrew, not her. He'd been waiting for the right moment. And now, at last, the moment had come. Alex took the tray and hurried to an elderly woman, apparently the bride's grandmother, who felt ill from the heat. Noticing this, Alex quickly went to the kitchen and returned with a tray with a carafe of cold water and a couple of glasses. Andrew hurried to meet his ex-fiancée, full of intentions to humiliate her. In his head, he had already formed a suitable phrase. Nay, hello. The past just wouldn't let go. Waitress reflexes in action. He was counting on those words to remind Alex of her past and who she really was. Alex looked up at Andrew with surprised eyes and seemed a little confused, and that was it. So much for the glossy exterior, Andrew thought. Alex hasn't changed a bit, and I still seem to be a huge influence on her. Just like before. Hello to you too, Alex said quietly. Putting the tray in front of the old woman and stepping aside, Andrew, satisfied with himself, returned to his seat. He felt almost happy. Yes, he had managed to hurt Alex. Now she didn't look so arrogant and radiant in his eyes anymore, and that was great. Andrew decided to ask a young girl to dance, Emma's niece, I think. This girl had been sending him loving glances all evening, fascinated by the supposedly successful capital city guest. Andrew decided to capitalize on this impression and asked her to dance. She happily accepted. Andrew did it for Alex. Let her see how much fun he's having and how popular he is. Even the young beauties are throwing themselves around his neck. It seems that Andrew achieved the desired effect. Alex looked at him dancing with the young cousin of the bride, and there was sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she was jealous. Perhaps she still had feelings for Andrew. It was pleasant for Andrew to think so, but it wasn't enough for him. He wanted the people around him to laugh at Alex, though he couldn't understand why he wanted to do that. Perhaps by humiliating her, he felt more successful and important. Andrew secretly watched Alex, waiting for the right moment.
And that moment came. Someone spilled champagne on the floor, and Alex, not noticing the puddle, slipped, waving her hands. Almost falling, she grabbed the column at the last moment, miraculously keeping her balance. Someone suppressed an exclamation. Someone grinned. And Andrew said aloud,
Man, well, you were an elephant in a china shop, and you still are. Are you talking about the elephant in the china shop again? A familiar voice suddenly sounded. Andrew shifted his gaze from Alex to the man who had appeared behind her back and saw Samuel in front of him. He had come into the restaurant unnoticed, probably only a couple minutes ago. Samuel, without taking his eyes off Andrew, walked over to Alex, helped her up and put his arm around her waist. There was sadness on Alex's face. That elephant in the china shop. Is that what you called her at the bar back then? Remember? Samuel continued. Andrew nodded, though he couldn't recall that moment. It was with that phrase of yours that my introduction to this wonderful girl began, Samuel said, smiling at Alex. So, my many thanks to you. But don't say that to her again, or you'll have to deal with me. Samuel seemed to be joking. He was smiling as he said the phrase, but his eyes were dead serious. Stunned, Andrew returned to his seat. His lady, Emma's young cousin, sat down next to him and started chattering excitedly. Andrew didn't care for her. He was looking at Samuel, who was very gently supporting Alex by the hand. A crowd immediately gathered around them. Kevin was there too. Old acquaintances were drinking, joking, discussing something cheerfully. And Andrew couldn't bring himself to join them, even though he really wanted to. But he was too stunned, too lost. What was going on here? I don't understand, he said at last. What's Samuel doing here? These are Kevin's buddies. Kevin's known him since he was a kid. He's his idol. Andrew's young companion said, well, she was helpful. Surely this girl could give him some information. And Emma's cousin gladly told all she knew. It turns out that Samuel, who has already made quite a good career in New York, often visits his hometown. He has parents here who did not want to leave their small homeland, but also friends, of course. Samuel all this time continued to communicate with Kevin and his buddies. They often met at the rock bar. Andrew would have been in that hangout too if he hadn't left. So gradually, they all developed an almost friendly relationship. Alex. He met her at the same rock bar. They say that she was insulted by some guy right in front of Samuel. Well, the girl shared the details. And it was because of that he paid attention to her. He liked her right away. Samuel fell in love with her, even wrote a lot of songs for her. In my opinion, these songs of his, which are for Alex, are the most beautiful. But Alex, I think she was in love with someone else at the time. She had some kind of unhappy love affair. Weird. Who could resist Samuel? This one was hoping, expecting something from her old boyfriend. He was said to have done her a bad turn, left her before the wedding, I think. So she was in a terrible state at the time. Emma said Alex was even in the hospital. I don't know what happened to her, but Andrew did. He knew why Alex was in the hospital, because she was so distressed. She'd lost her baby, their baby. Kevin and Emma told me. Alex didn't go back to work at the rock bar. She went to her family in the country, and Samuel found her, got her address from some people he knew and went. Samuel himself. It's such an amazing story. I never would have believed it could happen. Don't believe in fairy tales after that. Yeah, it's a really unique story. For some reason, Andrew was picturing it all very vividly. It was like watching a movie. Samuel goes to a rock bar every night hoping to meet the waitress who charmed him. Of course, he learned all he could about Alex from mutual acquaintances. Kevin and the other buddies all knew, of course, that Andrew had dumped Alex before the wedding and left for New York. The guys, they understood the friend, especially since he wasn't going to give up the baby, and even supported him. Approve of the deed. Well, anyone can fall out of love, but dreams should come true, Kevin said in a deep voice when he heard Andrew was leaving. Samuel saved Alex, pulled her out of the depths of despair. He was there for her during the most difficult time of her life. At first, Samuel came to her village every day. Every time, he'd pour himself out in a lovely way. Young Alex, says she, it's strange, but she didn't want to be with him. How is that possible? I can't imagine. Such a man. And she must have loved the old one, the one who left her on the eve of her wedding. But Samuel kept visiting her. It's so romantic. And of course, Alex melted. And they've been together ever since. What? They got married. Andrew saw a press report about Samuel's wedding, but there were no pictures of it online. And Samuel preferred to keep his private life private. Andrew had no idea that Samuel's wife was Alex. Alex, the woman he'd run away from years ago and still had feelings for. Why else would he suddenly have this strange desire to humiliate her in front of everyone? Yes, they got married. The wedding was here, by the way. Both of them didn't want to make a big fuss about it. It was a quiet, low-key affair. Then they flew to New York and live there now. They flew here to visit Samuel's parents for a couple days. Kevin found out about it and invited them to the wedding. Pretty cool, huh? Alex got here first. Samuel had some urgent business to attend to, but here he is. Really, they make a great couple. Andrew looked at Samuel and Alex. They were sitting at the other end of the table surrounded by guests. Samuel gently put his arm around his spouse's shoulders, and she put her hand on his knee. Idle, they really did look like a harmonious couple and looked simply gorgeous together. Andrew suddenly realized that he was the one who wanted to hug Alex and look into her eyes. He was the one who wanted that woman's smile. He would never again meet someone who would love him so genuinely. Andrew had tried many times, but it was all wrong. He destroyed his happiness years ago with his own hands. And now his reality is he works for pennies, lives alone, no friends, no favorite woman by his side, no children. The man who was once his idol and whom Andrew still sincerely admires, Samuel considers him a scoundrel. And rightly so, by the way. They have children. Andrew's companion, as if reading his thoughts, completed the picture of Alex's current happy life. She had no idea that Andrew was the cruel bridegroom who left his bride before the wedding. Otherwise, she would hardly have spoken to him in such a friendly manner. The boy and the girl are twins. I've even seen them. They're so cute, like the babies in the commercials. Andrew felt like a jerk. First, he wanted to make a splash with the people he knew, to come here as some sort of metropolitan visitor. Successful, more accomplished than his small-town friends. At least for a couple days, to feel like someone more important than he really was.
And Alex, wanting to humiliate her, was pathetic and ridiculous too. She was doing so well in her life that his attempts to ruin her mood looked silly, to say the least. Andrew couldn't stand being here any longer. The very atmosphere was weighing on him. The sight of happy faces, familiar faces from the past, made him sick. It was not enough to start behaving inappropriately in front of everyone. Andrew felt that he was close to smashing a plate on the floor, smashing the wall with his fist in the end, or even worse, crying. He was cut short by a cloud of all sorts of emotions. Andrew realized he had to leave, silently, quickly, without saying goodbye to anyone. Samuel himself was here. It was unlikely that anyone would notice Andrew's disappearance now. The man got up and headed for the exit. Hurry, 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 to get away from here. I don't care where. It was not a matter of the first importance.
And so Andrew wandered through the night streets. He's already gotten a decent distance from the restaurant. His feet carry him toward the center of town. The man passed a rock bar. No, he had no desire to return to that place. He left behind the public garden where he spent so much time with his friends, bypassed the amusement park. He had many memories with each of these places, mostly happy and pleasant ones. He didn't want to go home. His mom, grandfather, and grandmother would be there. They would start asking Andrew about what had happened. They'd be worried, anxious. No, it's better to be outside by yourself. Andrew will come back later when the family is asleep. The man walked through his hometown, wherever he could see. Crushed, confused, he felt like a complete nobody and regretted that he had come to Kevin's wedding. He wished this situation had never happened in the first place. "Andrew, wait, I can't catch up with you." A voice came from behind him. The man turned around and it was the same young girl, Emma's cousin, rushing toward him. Andrew didn't even remember her name. "What are you doing here? You left so suddenly. I followed you. Your face was strange and very sad, I think. Why did you follow me? Why did you follow me?" The man was surprised. "Well, because I didn't feel like breaking up with you." Andrew looked into her pure, sincere eyes and wondered, could it be that he, so lowly and mean, could like this young creature? Apparently, the girl was really fascinated by him. Strangely, but it made his soul warm. Andrew realized that not all was lost. He's only 35. A whole life is ahead of him, and what kind of life it will be depends only on him. Obviously, the man had made a lot of mistakes, but he's only human. The main thing is to make the right conclusions and live on, live happily. Something needs to change in yourself, in your worldview. If the previous actions led to such a deplorable result, it means only one thing. Now it is necessary to act differently. That's all. The girl looked at Andrew with hope. In her eyes, he saw admiration. No, the man was not going to take advantage of the young beauty's naivety. Right now, he would just walk her to the restaurant, and there was no telling what could happen to a young girl on the street at night. Andrew will say something reassuring and wise to her goodbye. He's an adult, and he'll leave this town. He's got a long way to go to work out his mistakes, but it's going to work out, it's going to work out.
From the window of the hospital room, I could see the chimneys of the factory, which had been raining for a week. It was gloomy and damp, so even walking around the small green courtyard was no fun. Jason felt like he was slowly dying, and, admittedly, he had reason to think so. He'd been rich and happy until a few months ago. Life had seemed so wonderful any dream, traveling, buying expensive things without thinking about the price. But all that wasn't enough when illness came into his life. Continuing research, the doctor divorced his hands at every question of his wealthy patient Jason Dupri. Endless procedures, tests, visits to specialists. Jason was so tired of it all. Given that it wasn't producing any results, his strength was diminishing. He was having unbearable headaches, and he had to fight insomnia with sedatives. He was fading from day to day. At first, his only joy was his wife. He waited for her arrival every day, got out of bed and looked out the window, as long as he had the strength to stand. Of course, he was well cared for, ready to come at the first call, and the ward was more like a room in an expensive hotel. But still, there is nothing more precious than loved ones. It was only when he was sick that Jason realized that his wife was the only one who could visit him, not because of money, connections, or business, but because she cared about him. But for some reason she came less and less often, and the meetings grew shorter, more silent. Annie would sit by his bedside for about 20 minutes, as if it were a heavy duty rather than the desire of a loving wife, and then she would leave on some pretext. Paul says I need brain surgery, but the outcome is 50-50, Jason sadly shared in one of their brief encounters. Oh well, we have to try. After all, Paul isn't just any doctor, he's been in the clinic for 15 years, Annie said affirmatively, looking out the window and thinking about something of her own. I'm afraid of dying, her husband was quite candid. Jason, what are you making up? She asked irritably. But then she came to her senses and said more softly and cheerfully, it's going to be okay, you'll see, touching his arm. Annie got up and started to leave. What, you already? Jason asked. But I just got here, didn't I? Stay a little longer, I've got to go, she replied. I'll come back the other day and stay with you a little longer. The door shut behind her, and outside the window the sun, which had been illuminating the room with golden sunset light all this time, disappeared over the horizon. Twilight was thickening. He felt so sad that Jason cried for the first time in his adult life. He was overcome with fear of dying of illness and the loneliness of those he considered his friends. They had only come once to negotiate the sale of his share of the company. His parents were long gone, and Jennifer had suddenly grown cold to him. But even that coldness wasn't as frightening as her smiles and the satisfied smirk she sometimes allowed herself, forgetting herself. There seemed to be some other life outside this room, some happy place where they were happy. And Jennifer came here as a matter of duty. It would have hurt Jason even more if he'd seen her exhale with relief when she was on the porch of the clinic, waiting hopefully for the car to meet her. All that kept her near her husband these weeks was the huge inheritance she was preparing to receive after his death. It had gotten quite dark, and in the gloom only the red lights of the medical machines and the television could be seen. They could hear people talking in the hallway, and the beams from the headlights of passing cars could be seen on the walls. But Jason was alone, wondering what he had done wrong in his life to die at 32. There was a knock at the door. Then a small female figure appeared in the doorway. An orderly entered the room and brought in her cleaning tools. It's time to go for a walk, she smiled. Can I stay here? I'm not bothering you, Jason said cheerfully. He'd grown fond of these short visits in the last few days, when the older nurse, Darcy Peterson, had gone on sick leave and the positive, red-haired Kathy had taken her place. All right, she agreed. I'll make it quick. You can stay a little longer. I'm all alone in here. Oh, come on, you have so many business people coming to you. Not one patient is not so popular with us. It's all business. Katie's been quick to mop the floor. Take out your flowers. Turn on the TV. That'll make it more fun. And soon Paul Alexandrovich will come to see you, the girl said contentedly. I'm standing at the door with a mop in my hands. You're good, Kathy. Come in and she'll be cheerful at once. How do you do it? I just find something good in everything, she smiled and closed the door carefully behind her. Perhaps no one but Katie had ever been so sincere and straightforward with him, and that made it feel better, if only for a little while, especially since the doctors kept shrugging their shoulders and ordering more tests. And Annie didn't come once a week, and once a week looked into the room, and without taking off her coat, inquired about her husband's health. Not that she listened much to his stories, but he still shared his worries with her. He'd long ago realized that his wife had lost all interest in him, and was talking only out of a sense of duty, or even, that was what Jason was afraid of, pushing the bad thoughts away. Well, his Annie can't be with him only because of the inheritance, not to love him, but hoping he'll get the money soon. Waiting for him to know. That thought he could not endure. Fortunately, his heavy musings were interrupted by Katie's whirlwind, who burst into the room like a fresh breeze on a sweltering day. She was holding a paper bag from the local bakery, and the appetizing aroma of freshly baked goods boded well for Jason. A couple of fresh buns and a sandwich. He'd rarely been able to eat anything really good lately. The hospital food, though prepared for him with care, was far from homemade. Thank you, Katie, he said sincerely as she helped him up. Eat up and get well, she winked and placed the table of food on the patient's lap. It was amazing how much of an appetite he suddenly had. Jason thought for a moment that he was sure to get better and get back to business. Did you go to see him again? Nurse Irene asked with a chuckle when Katie entered the office. What's the big deal? And you still don't take any money from him? No, what do I need his money for? I'm not doing anything. I'm just being supportive. Don't worry, you're a lover. I wouldn't advise it. It's better not to run into his wife. Sure, incredulously stretched the woman. Why do you say that? Katie was indignant. I'm not going anywhere. Irene had hinted at extra fees for almost all the wealthy patients at their clinic. Jason was no exception. Maybe that was why she found it hard to believe in Katie's sincerity. That same evening, his wife visited him. An expensive black car was waiting for her at the entrance, and she was dressed smartly, as if she were going to a restaurant or the theater. How are you? She asked impatiently, going over her gloves in her hands. You know, not bad, Jason replied in a weak but cheerful voice. Played a game of chess with one man today. He's in the next room over and he's going crazy with idleness too. Good, she nodded her head. I've been meaning to ask you. Anyway, I've run out of money in my account. I need to buy a couple things right away. Can you call the bank? Okay, after that, Jason, you couldn't tell anything from his facial expression, but his heart dropped. He called his assistant, and after arranging everything, he looked at her, all set. Can you go? Thank you, darling, she replied and left. Left alone, Jason felt the terrible headache again. At his moans, a nurse came running in, followed by Paul. Seeing a dose of painkillers, they watched him for a few more minutes and left, leaving him alone with his gloomy thoughts. Kathy, I have a favor to ask of you, Jason addressed the nurse during the morning cleanup. Excuse me, dear. A smile lit up the girl's face, but the next moment it was immediately gone. I'm going to die soon and I just can't help but think about my funeral. No, don't say anything, please. My wife and co-workers will do everything hastily. Or maybe they won't do it at all. Jason, Dimitri, what on earth are you talking about? Katie couldn't take it anymore. What death? What funeral? You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. You're a very good, kind girl. Kathy, I've never met anyone like you in my life. But still, I beg you, go to the funeral home, book, and make the arrangements. Pick out the casket, the wreaths, the clothes. But what else is required there? He spoke so earnestly that good-natured Kathy could not refuse. Paul had ordered her to leave work early for the afternoon, and her friend Irene was already talking about it. There she goes again, with all her favors and all her secrets, she told the other nurses. You'll see we'll have a scandal on the ward over this. Jennifer's not going to be happy. Going to the funeral home was awkward and scary. Katie had never had to choose such items before. She decided she wouldn't take the responsibility, but would take some catalog and let Jason decide on the casket and burial clothes if he wanted to. She walked to the closest bureau to the hospital, stepped around a parked black car, and opened the door with trembling hands. The first thing that caught her eye were the numerous wreaths of artificial branches and flowers hanging on the walls. After running her eyes over them, she looked in surprise at the man and woman talking to the counselor. Annie was standing near the counter. Next to her, a tall young man, dressed smartly in a dark blue jacket, perfectly ironed pants and leather boots. His companion was not far behind. She wore an elegant black dress, a coat, high-heeled shoes, and a shining necklace around her neck. Their faces expressed sorrow and sadness. Katie stepped closer. Yes, let's stop there with the roses. The woman pointed her finger at the picture. We'll write to my beloved husband on the ribbons. At this point, Annie pulled a handkerchief out of her pocket and held it to her eyes. Was she actually crying or wiping away dry eyes? Katie didn't figure it out. Seeing her like that, shocked, she immediately turned around and walked out, circling the brazenly parked car again. She headed home, taking advantage of the unexpected free time she had. They were having a merchandise update right now. They asked her to come back in a week. She lied to Jason all the previous evening. Katie wondered if she should tell him about the funeral home meeting. After all, it was unlikely she had another husband who had passed away unexpectedly. It was more likely that she'd chosen a wreath for Jason with that regretful look on her face. What is this? The wife has already buried her husband in absentia, but the tongue did not turn to tell such a person who lost the will to live. Not only are his loved ones not visiting him, they're preparing to bury him. Annie showed up a couple days later. As always, beautifully dressed in a cloud of exquisite perfume. She walked past Katie without even noticing, or even giving the rich man an attentive glance. What on earth was she up to? Jason spoke a little worriedly at first, but solemnly, as if he had prepared for this speech in advance. "I have an idea, and I think you'll like it." "What idea?" he asked without enthusiasm, turning his face toward the window and looking at the treetops that retain their golden foliage. "The doctors can do nothing. How many treatments have we had?" "I've lost count. Treatment, no results. So I thought maybe you could go to the country for a while, live in nature, get away from these hospital walls." "I'll think about it." Jason turned and looked hopefully at his wife, expecting to see sympathy on her face, but there was none. She smiled coldly, rising from her chair. "You don't love me anymore." "What nonsense is this?" "Of course I do," she said with a poorly concealed effort. "I'm just tired, Jason, I'm tired. I have to deal with all your clients, your investors, your employees. It's exhausting." A week later, Jason was discharged at their request, and his wife took him to the village where a house had been bought for him. As he watched the trees and fields outside the window, he kept replaying the words he had heard in his head. During his last days at the clinic, Jason Dimitri had told him in a conspiratorial tone, "Irene, stopping by for 5 minutes. Apparently to give this information, I heard such a thing today." "What is it?" He turned grudgingly, preoccupied with his own fate. Jason was planning to agree to the surgery the doctor had insisted on. "I overheard your doctors talking today. They agreed not to tell you, of course, but that's cheating. What are you, after all?" Jason was angry. "You don't have more than 2 weeks to live." Irene poked him resentfully and walked away. That news hit him the hardest. He dismissed all thoughts of the surgery, almost stopped eating, stopped caring for himself. Calling his wife, Jason asked her to come and informed her of his decision to move into the country house, adding to himself, "But even those. Jason, why are you doing this? Do you need treatment?" Katie was worried when she heard the news of the patient's imminent discharge. "There's no need for treatment, Kathy," he answered. "I'll be dead soon." "What makes you think that?" "Stay," the nurse urged. Finally, she decided to make one last argument. "Do you know why I came back with nothing? When you sent me to the funeral parlor, because I met your wife and a man there, and they were choosing a wreath for you." "Well, they're absolutely right." "It's about time," Jason said indifferently. "What could I do with him?" Kathy asked him to take her number so he could call her if he needed help. After he left, Katie couldn't find a place to be. "Oh, calm down," Irene told her. When was the last job she didn't have time to clean, and in half the offices assigned to her? Who is he to you to worry so much? There's something wrong with this story, you know? I can't just take it and not think about it. You've got no business of your own. Go to work. Those rich people will sort it out for themselves," Irene said. "She's a noble one, isn't she? She doesn't want any money. She's worried sick." "I don't understand you." Kathy was upset. She suddenly felt very uncomfortable being around her coworker. "And about the money, you took something from them." "But you did," Irene replied proudly. "It's a sin not to take from someone like that. What's going on in their family? It's none of my business. And you stay out of it, you'll be the least of it." "What did you take them for?" Katie asked without her former friendly tone. "Oh, that's a very funny story," Irene laughed. "His wife must have been playing a trick on him and asked me to casually say, 'You've only got 2 weeks left.' You should have seen the look on his face." "Are you out of your mind?" Katie boiled up, glaring angrily at her former friend. She walked out and slammed the door behind her. How she wished she had asked Jason for his phone number. For 2 weeks she hadn't known where he'd been taken, what was happening to him, or if he was even alive. In the meantime, Jason was settling into his new home. It was an old house with simple furnishings, but cozy and bright. She promised to come every other day, to hire a nurse and a groundskeeper. She disappeared almost immediately, so I had to do it myself. Strangely enough, Jason did feel better. The silence, the coolness of autumn, the vast vistas outside the window, the scent of apples and honey, all of it transported him back to his childhood, to his grandmother's little house where he'd spent his summer vacations. On the other hand, a heavy, painful desire to say goodbye to everything was growing inside. Without wanting to, he did not want to die, especially alone, abandoned by everyone and needed by no one. It was not easy to get up and move. But that was half the trouble. The house was full of unpleasant surprises that could be found anywhere. On the first day, Jason walked into the kitchen and fell into the basement with one foot, miraculously not breaking anything. When he got up, he examined the broken piece of flooring and noticed that it had been purposely filed down, repairing the floor. Jason started cooking. He turned on the stove, put a pot on it, and went to lie down to build up his strength for the soup. He couldn't rest, though, because soon a strange odor of burning meat wafted from the kitchen. The portable tank had suddenly sprung a leak. That's the last thing we need. I'll have to buy an electric stove, Jason said to himself, and then he grinned. Just when I'm about to die, there's a stove. When he entered the bedroom in the evening, the master sensed something slowly and silently moving on the carpet beside the bed. He came closer to examine the strange creature, but immediately recoiled in fear. On the floor, twisted in a ring, lay a brown snake with a red fanciful pattern. Where would a viper come from in the house? This circumstance absolutely threw him off his guard. The time was late, he was alone, and he knew no one in the village. He didn't know what other traps these rooms held. Overcoming his fear, Jason opened the window, took the heavy cotton blankets left by the previous owners, and threw them at the snake. The snake fell silent, giving him the opportunity to grab it and throw it outside. The rustling of leaves between the trees in the garden made a movement from the window into the thicket. The uninvited guests disappeared into the darkness. Jason lay awake until morning, listening to every rustle. The next day he tossed and turned between wanting to call a cab to town and not wanting to do anything about it. The feeling of hopelessness and lack of energy only made itself felt in the evening, spent from a sick sleep. He was able to get up, wash his face, and organize some sort of dinner for himself. There was no more energy for anything else. He lay down on the couch. Suddenly the ceiling shrieked. From above came sounds like quick, small footsteps. Another night of no sleep, Jason asked aloud. He got to his feet, threw his jacket over his shoulders, and went to find out what wonders the attic had in store for him. However, it was impossible to do so. As he climbed the few wooden steps up, the whole structure collapsed. Jason fell with it, and now he was lying on the dusty floor, not knowing what to grab onto. His head ached from the impact. His leg burned with fire. It was only half an hour later, when the pain subsided, that he was able to crawl to the door and sneak inside. Realizing he couldn't do it alone, Jason dialed his wife's number. Then he dialed several friends, but ironically they were all either unavailable or answered with a series of long beeps. Lying on the floor, Jason stared at the ceiling, wondering how he'd gotten to this point. Scenes of their lavish wedding, to which about 100 guests had been invited, their vacation at the seashore, the purchase of a car, conferences, and business meetings appeared before his eyes. He felt success and good fortune dissolving into thin air as the brilliant future he had planned lost its shape. Who is he now? What does he live for? There was one more number in the phone book that he wanted to call, but something prevented him from doing so. The sun was already out of the window, and dusk was settling in when Jason made up his mind. Katie, hello. You recognize me, of course. How are you? I've been so worried about you. She sounded so warm that he sighed. How nice it would be to see her again right now in this very house. Then all the problems would go to the back of his mind. It's okay. I'm living it up, getting high. It's nice and quiet here, he began cheerfully, except that I fell down the stairs and hurt my leg trying to call someone, and I can't get up. So it's not a fracture, Katie was worried. I don't think so, but it hurts to get up. I'll come over. Is that okay? I'd really appreciate it. Don't apologize. It's my pleasure. The room seemed brighter and cozier after those words. Tomorrow he wouldn't be alone. Tomorrow a girl with shiny red hair and an infectious smile would appear here, break the agonizing silence, dispel the painful atmosphere and the fear of death. Paul Alexander was angry for some reason when Kathy asked him for one of her 4 days off. There's no one to work, and you give a day's notice. That's not how things are done, Catherine. But I really have to. I do have someone I need to help. I understand that, but I can't replace you. I have an important patient coming in tomorrow. Everything has to be perfect. So go to work. Paul Alexander, I've been working 2 years without vacation or time off. Can Darcy Peterson take my place? No vacations at home, no vacations, and some people don't even get a day off. Darcy Peterson can't leave because, again, a solid patient is coming in. I need a young, beautiful staff in the meantime. So a very good person has to suffer because of the whims of your rich patient. Katie couldn't take it anymore. She had never let herself talk to her boss like that before, even though she knew about all his machinations and had been regularly supplied with that knowledge until recently. Something wrong. Write a statement. Calculating accounting indifferently, replied Paul, hoping, apparently, that the threat would have a quick effect. Okay, Katie calmly replied. She was so angry that she actually packed her things and went to write her resignation letter. Having worked honestly at the clinic for so many years, she had never expected to be treated like this. I'll find something better. I have experience. Yes, they would take her to any other institution, she explained to her colleagues. Gathered in the corridor, just sitting on the bus on the way to the village, Katie reprimanded herself for this act. It would take time to find a job. And what would she live on if she lost her only source of income? On the other hand, it felt like a relief. It was like a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders. This job without vacations and sick days had been wearing her down for a long time. Paul's words were the last straw. A familiar village flew past, and Katie pressed herself against the window to catch a glimpse of the White House behind the trees. Almost at the very edge of the street, it was where she'd spent her childhood. Her heart ached at the memory. She wanted badly for the bus to slow down near the dilapidated red brick bus stop. The doors opened and my mother came in with a full basket of mushrooms and birch branches, from which she would deftly assemble large bath brooms. The family lived poorly, and it was from this very poverty that Katie had gone to the city and entered medical school. But now she would give anything to sit with her mother once more at the table in their small kitchen, drink mint tea, sleep on the stove, and lie down longer in the morning. Listening to the wood crackle on the stove, nostalgic Katie didn't notice when she reached the village where Jason lived. It wasn't hard to find his house. She stepped inside and found him lying on the couch, covered by a thin blanket. The man was dozing on the couch. The room was a mess. The blanket was lying on the floor. There was a plate of food and a mug of tea under the bed. Katie felt sorry for Jason. The whole place was a testament to the fact that he had been sent here to live out his life, forgotten by everyone. Desperate, he didn't look like himself at this minute. "Hello, Katie," Jason cheered, waking up. "Hello, how are you here?" As you can see, he looked around the room with his gaze, although I still feel better here than I did in the hospital by evening. The house, as well as its sole occupant, began to look noticeably better. There were tablecloths on the tables, curtains on the windows, and the kitchen smelled of baked potatoes and vegetables. Jason cheered up. "I miss a proper home-cooked meal," he asked twice for more, leaving him to rest. Katie went in search of the store. Fortunately, it didn't take long to find it. There were people crowded in front of the little blue house with the grocery sign. They all gave the newcomer an attentive stare, obviously trying to understand who she was and who she had come to see. "Oh, what a beautiful girl. Do we have someone's granddaughter?" the clerk asked, pulling out cereal, butter, bread, and other items on the list. "Katie, I'm here to see Jason Dimitri. He lives on the outskirts. Maybe you know him." "You wouldn't know. A new guy doesn't get to know anybody. He doesn't go out too much." "Is it hard for him to go out? Does he get sick?" "Well, yes," nodded a large man at the counter, the chairman of the local cooperative. "So sick that his wife has already prepared a place for him in the cemetery." "What? How could that be?" Katie was surprised. "That's it. We are, as they say, shocked ourselves. Maybe you're confused. Look for yourself. They dug up her grave there. They called someone from the city." From the sales clerk's face, you could understand that this topic causes superstitious fear in the village. That's why few people dared to stop by Jason's house to meet their new neighbor. But how could they? Can it? The man is alive, and they've almost buried him. Maybe all this weirdness isn't an accident. Katie stayed with him for a week, during which time she got to know the villagers. Next door to Jason's cottage lived Granny, small, quiet, and pleasant to talk to. Katie found comfort in talking to her. She reminded her of her grandmother. It was she who had suggested Jason's unconventional treatment. "If medicine can't help, maybe we should try folk remedies," she said, pouring tea. "What do you mean?" Katie wondered. "There's a healer in the neighboring village. I haven't been there myself. I've heard that people even come to her from the city for help." Jason laughed at the idea, and Katie was eager to try it. "It's not like we're losing anything," she urged. "Let's just test it. Was she really helping, or was it all just talk?" 2 days later, they were on an old, cramped bus that traveled between villages twice a day. They had 3 hours to find the mysterious healer. Otherwise, they wouldn't make it home in time. Wandering the streets and asking locals, Jason and Katie finally reached her. The woman in the place did stand in the distance and greeted her guests unfriendly with tiny dark windows and a drooping wicket. Katie felt uneasy. She was beginning to regret the decision to come here. Jason treated it with the same irony, smiling and joking. It was hard to walk, though, and he was tempted to lie down. There was a light in the window, and footsteps were heard. The door opened, and a woman of about 50, short, in a brown long dress and a light shawl, from under which her black hair was poking out, came out. She spoke quietly, slowly, as if thinking over every word. When she learned the purpose of the visit, she invited the guests into the house. The wooden floor creaked with every step. Light fell from a large window. There were many potted flowers on the windowsill, and a cat sleeping peacefully on the ropes stretched from one wall to another. Collected brooms of herbs were drying. It smelled of chamomile and wormwood. Katie shuddered as something big, sad, and shaggy came out from behind the stove. It sighed and snorted. "Don't be afraid, that's my dog Baron. He is quite old now. He won't bite," said the landlady. The dog Baron lazily looked at the people who came into the house and made a muffled sound resembling barking, spreading his paws wide and walked towards the exit. Once he was outside, the owner invited Jason and Katie to sit down. Just like that, no one knows what it could be. "The only thing that saves us is painkillers," Catherine finished her story. Without knowing the backstory, you'd think that Annie, Jason's wife, was so worried about him. "Well, can I try?" Barbara spoke up after some silence. "We'll probably go," Jason smiled. "The bus is coming soon. We have to get there in time." Kathy looked at him pleadingly, as if begging him to stay at least another minute. "I don't believe in eviction." The landlady addressed him. "I must admit, the whole thing seemed strange to me," Jason replied. "Jason, come on. Please," Katie begged. "All right," he surrendered, unable to withstand her hopeful look. "Barbara, any money I'll pay. As long as you treat all right," she agreed. "I don't need the money. But there is one request. I'll tell you when you're well deal," Jason replied without hesitation. He was sure he wouldn't have to fulfill the request. The guests stayed the night in Barbara's small hut. Early in the morning, Katie awoke. She peeked out from under the blanket and saw her hostess preparing some kind of potion. There was already a fire burning in the stove. On the stove, something large from a pot exuded the smell of food. The girl closed her eyes and imagined the same old cottage of her grandmother, which always smelled appetizingly of baked goods, dried mushrooms, and raspberry jam. Strangely enough, Barbara was not at all embarrassed by the arrival of the guests. On the contrary, she had persuaded them to move in temporarily because their house was closed for a while. Her yard was bustling with life, with goats scurrying about. A couple of goats from somewhere deep within the buildings. A large black and white cow made a lingering sound that was new to Jason. This kind of environment was new to him. Everything surprised and amused him. He was still alert, but he still had headaches and a terrible weakness that forced him to lie down day and night.
Katie, on the contrary, felt like a fish in water in the village house. She was an excellent housekeeper, skilled in animal handling, milking the cow and stoking the stove. It was getting colder and colder outside. Snow was falling, foreshadowing the imminent winter. A month passed unnoticed by everyone. Barbara showed up with her potions, which she continued to make good-natured fun of, giving Jason a cool compress when he was in a lot of pain.
And she made him take up hardening. He only really approved of the latter and went outside every morning to douse himself with warm water, gradually lowering the temperature. I'll be able to swim in the ice hole by winter, he reported, clearing the yard with a shovel. When Kathy returned from the village with her shopping, she stood beside him and looked at him in surprise. "What are you doing?" she asked confusedly. In the time they'd spent together, all three of them had switched to you. "Shoveling snow." "What did you think?" Jason smiled. "Snow," she repeated, as if not understanding the meaning of what he said. "How are you feeling?" "Fine, but it wouldn't hurt to lie down. That was only the first bell." He was indeed getting better every day. And after 2 months, Jason could walk to the store on his own, carrying water and firewood. And on New Year's Day, he cleared out the big tree in the yard, which soon glowed with colorful balls. Katie was childishly excited about New Year's Eve, determined not to think about the future, at least during this vacation. In January, it was decided to return. Katie went to check on the house, putting the place in hasty order. She headed for the exit, but at the door she ran into Annie, who apparently wasn't the first time she'd come, trying to track down her husband. "Who are you?" she asked sharply, squeamishly looking Katie over from head to toe. It didn't matter. Not wanting to talk, she locked the door and walked past. "Where's Jason?" Annie asked, puzzled. Katie turned around at that moment and looked angrily at the diamond-clad rich man in the mink coat.
"You'd probably want him to be in the other world, wouldn't you?" she exclaimed. "What kind of nonsense is that? It's nonsense to order wreaths and dig a grave for a living person. I promise you. You won't get what you want. Jason will be alive and well."
With those words, Katie turned and walked away. She was seething with resentment, and not even the cold winter wind could cool the fire. Annie remained standing, not knowing how to react. The whole business had already been formally taken over by her, and in fact it no longer belonged to him, but was run by her lover. Waiting for recovery was going to get in the way of the ambitious couple, and something had to be done about it. Katie returned and told Jason what had happened, but Jason, inspired by the miraculous rescue, didn't want to fight or revenge. "Let her do what she wants," he said. "God is her judge. I don't care about that now. I need to save my health and start a new life." Feeling energized, Jason set about renovating the house. In addition to his business accounts, he had some savings for a rainy day. His wife didn't know about them, so cashing them out was no problem. Katie planned to get a job on the farm, but in the meantime she was helping him settle in. Now, after his recovery, Jason could confess his feelings to her without fear of condemning her to a lifetime of caring for a hopeless patient. She was happy, and of course reciprocated. Once he had taken care of the household chores, he suggested that Kathy visit Barbara and see what she wanted to ask in exchange for his help. "I've been looking forward to it," she said as she set the tea on the table. "I can't do it alone. Maybe you can." Barbara's daughter had gone to the city in search of a better life, to earn money, if she was lucky, to get married. There were no other options for her in the country but the farm, and that was not a fate she was happy with. After changing several places, Annie found a job with good pay and conditions. Some wealthy man was looking for a maid. Of course, a girl from the backwoods was happy with all this decent money, huge, beautiful houses. Then the employer began to show her signs of attention. I told her, "Give it up, come home. We'll live together. Maybe you'll meet a good, hard-working man," sadly told the witch doctor. But it was as if she didn't even hear. She just said, "Be happy for me. We're happy." And then suddenly she disappeared. A month or two later, I pelted her with letters. She doesn't say a word. When I got there, I realized everything at once. I could already see her belly. Barbara's daughter was pregnant with twins. The boys were born healthy. But the youngest mom had a hemorrhage. They fought for her life for days. "It was the worst day of my life," Barbara cried. "I still can't believe she's gone. And I can't see the boys." "Where are they now? Who are they with?" Jason asked. "Their father took them to his house, but he let me see them. Even brought them here a few times. They're about 10 now. They're big," the loving grandmother said with pride in her voice. "Now he's in jail for something. And my boys are with my stepmother, but she doesn't need them at all. She only needs money. That's all." Jason promised to help. He called up some old friends to get the addresses. 2 weeks later, They sent him all the information and he was on his way to New York for the first time since he'd moved to the village. The apartment where the boys and their stepmother lived was in a new high-rise. Climbing to the 11th floor, Jason rang the doorbell and was opened by a tall, slender brunette. "What do you want?" she asked in a rough, unpleasant voice, and he smelled cigarettes. "I'm looking for Inna Vitalievna," I said. She looked him over and found him attractive. "Are you here?" and flapped her unnaturally long eyelashes. At that moment, two blonde heads looked out of the room and looked at the guest with curiosity. Inna turned around and snarled angrily. "Well, go away, stick out. Learn your lessons." "I just came to see them," Jason explained calmly.
To see them? The stepmother's face changed.
"What do you want?" "I want to know why you won't let them see their grandmother." "That's crazy money it took. So tell her she won't get a penny. Now get out of here." "Wait a minute. I'm not waiting for anything. Go away, or I'll scream and call the police." The last thing Jason saw were two hopeful eyes staring at him from behind the door. On his way home, he decided to do whatever it took to help the boys get back to their grandmother's house. They would be much better off there than with that woman, and if housing was an issue, he would buy them a house in the village or the nearest town. Jason found a lawyer, and he began to prepare the documents for filing with the court. Now all they had to do was wait until everything was ready. He and Kathy settled down, made repairs, updated the furniture, and thought about opening a small company. And in the spring, a very happy event came to their home. Kathy is pregnant. No sooner had the happy couple rejoiced at this event, as Annie appeared on the threshold of the house, like storm clouds on a warm summer day. She didn't look as smug as usual. "I really need your help," she said. Quietly, Jason led her outside. "I thought I'd already done everything for you," he said, smiling slightly. "Isn't there more to it? You couldn't steal my money?" "Jason, I'm sorry. Life has punished me for everything." "All right, tell me what happened, and then we'll go." "Alex was taken hostage." "Do you understand?" she cried. "Alex who? Who took him hostage?" "Explain. I don't understand." "Their business problems started a month ago, but the current managers, Alexander and part-timer Lover, to the last convinced everyone that nothing terrible would happen. They decided to open a food market next to the existing one, and the competitors did not keep waiting. The owners started receiving threats. Annie got a phone call that morning. She told the story in bits and pieces, interrupted by sobs. Alex had been kidnapped and demanded a ransom equal to the value of the business she had fraudulently inherited from her ex-husband. "Are you sure about that, Alex?" Jason asked. "Don't be jealous," Annie asked. "I love him more than life. I won't let anything happen to him." "No, let's go to the police."
Annie jumped up, grabbed her bag, and started for the door. Her face was red with anger and fear.
"I came to you for help, not for you to talk me out of it." She never showed her face at Katie's again. Jason settled into his quiet life. The house shone clean. There was a small vegetable garden and fruit orchards, and a nice fence around the property. A new gate had been installed, and all the villagers passed by and admired it. Jason seriously considered opening a company, bought the place from the collapsed collective farm, hired employees to rebuild the cowshed and clear the area of garbage. Kathy decided to take veterinary courses and planned to get a lot done before giving birth. Everything was going well, but there was one thing that wouldn't budge. Barbara was still waiting for her grandchildren to come home, and her stepmother wasn't planning to give them up so easily. The lawyer had filed a petition with the court, then prepared appeals, gathered a mountain of documents, but the decision had gotten bogged down somewhere in the paperwork to make it stick. Jason found out where the twins' father was serving time and went there himself. It wasn't without difficulty that he managed to arrange a meeting. The man was seriously ill, lying in the hospital wing. The prisoner seemed to be a broken man, but retained the remnants of his former beauty. He took a breath after descending the stairs and scrutinized the visitor, trying to understand what business he might have come for. "That's it," the prisoner exhaled after Jason's story. "I'm all in favor of the boys living with their grandmother. You can be sure they didn't give up. I've arranged for them to get money every month, so she's getting her lips done with it." He said it without offense, but with irony. Jason was reminded of Ina's artificial appearance and her swagger. "Aren't you hoping to get out of here early?" "No, I've already got lung cancer," he said, and then added sadly, "Life is coming to an end. I left money for the boys. They each have their own account. They'll get it after 18, and Barbara Alexievna will get it too. You give me the amount, I'll tell you where it is. They can't live in a hut in the middle of the woods." With the father's written permission to take the children, it was much easier. And in a couple of weeks after this trip, they were already running along the dusty country road to their grandmother's new house. By this time, she had baked pies and walked from window to window, waiting for her favorite granddaughters. After living with a hateful stepmother, the boys were happy to be near their own person. Barbara loved them with all of her heart. She was kind and allowed them all the joys of village life: to pitch a tent in the garden, to lie on the roof and look at the stars, to go fishing early in the morning, to sleep on a bed with Irene on the veranda. She also took Jason's word that they wouldn't leave the twins if anything happened to her. "I'm not an old woman. It's scary if my grandchildren end up with strangers again," she told the couple. And they agreed without question, even though they argued, saying, "Don't think about bad things before you think." "How did she give them to you?" Katie wondered after they got back from town. "Hardly," Jason answered. "She was so hysterical. It scared me, not to mention the kids. She said she was going to destroy me." And was it really about the money? Now everyone wanted to forget about the past and start over, and there were plenty of reasons to do so. Katie was expecting a baby. The first calves had arrived on the farm, and there were plenty of people wanting to work. There'd been no jobs in the village for a long time. An opportunity came along, but the past stubbornly persisted, reminding her of herself again and again. One fine morning, Annie Zadorazny appeared on the doorstep with a bag in her hands. It was hard to recognize her. No fancy clothes, heels, jewelry, and makeup, only bags under her eyes. From the bag on her shoulders and the sad look in her eyes, Jason could easily guess that she'd given the business to those very thugs. But where was her beloved Alex? "What's wrong with you?" he asked, stepping out into the yard. "Jason, I came to see you," Annie replied. "Why?" "I don't understand. I need a place to live. I'm ready to work. I thought you were back in business. Where's your lover?" "Jason, he betrayed me when someone asked me to ransom him. It wasn't true. He conspired with them, and I was just being played." Annie cried. "I see. Well, can I offer you a job as a milkmaid? It's all I've got." She stayed. It was better for her to live with her ex-husband than to try to start from scratch. Of course, Katie resented this arrangement, but she kept her feelings in check so as not to make herself and Jason unnecessarily jealous. It was almost 2 months before the birth, and everyone was looking forward to meeting the baby. Katie sewed diapers and bonnets. Jason had brought the crib and planned to assemble it soon. The twins were inventing new games and making rattles, which Barbara filled with fragrant herbs. Everyone had joy and anticipation of a miracle. Just not Annie. The dirty work made her appearance rougher and her character more withdrawn. Contrary to expectations, she did not leave. In her first month of hard labor, she continued to persevere on the farm, doing everything she was asked to do. On a winter evening, Katie sat at home. Her husband had left for town in the afternoon and must have decided to stay there until morning, for a blizzard was raging outside. The roads had turned to snowdrifts in a matter of hours, and the wind was howling drearily from the window. When she heard footsteps outside the door, Katie was glad that Jason had probably come home. He was always calmer with her. She'd been feeling sick to her stomach all day, and it was frightening. It was a few kilometers to the hospital, but Annie appeared at the door, wearing felt boots and a woolen shawl over her hat. "What happened to you?" Katie thought, remembering the diamond-clad beauty walking proudly down the corridor in heels. "Are you alone?" "It's cold," asked the guest. "What did you want?" "I wanted to tell you something that you might have guessed yourself that you don't understand." Katie tried to remain calm, her temples throbbing unpleasantly, and her stomach tugged unbearably again. "Oh, come on. I've never noticed Jason coming home late from work," Annie said with cold gloating. "He works hard," Katie replied, getting up from the couch and going to the window, hoping to see her husband. Unfortunately, there was nothing but thick darkness. "He wants a naive, stupid fool. I'm tired of running from him, though sometimes I can't help myself. I'll be honest with you." Annie smiled, pleased with the effect she was having on Katie, but soon the smile faded, replaced by alarm and, finally, horror as the pregnant woman suddenly grabbed her stomach and sat on the floor, letting out an inhuman scream. Annie ran up to her and tried to turn her around, but she pushed her away with force. "Get out!" Katie screamed, still holding her stomach. I'm dying. Should I call Barbara?" The milkmaid was completely freaked out. She hadn't gotten up in 2 days. Katie exhaled. The contraction passed, but the next one came. It was clear to both of them that labor had begun, and no one could help them. This frightening thought left Annie in a stupor. For several minutes she stood in the middle of the room, not knowing what to do or where to run. Finally, gathering her thoughts, she went to the closet, opened it, took out the sheets and spread them on the floor, moving Katie onto them. The forced midwife went to the kitchen and washed her hands thoroughly. Found a towel and diapers. Coming with a desire for revenge, Annie quickly realized her new role. There was no escape. All disagreements and grudges were best left for later. Katie cried, moaning, the cool compress on her forehead instantly warming. She was thirsty. Calling for Jason, her train of thought was more like the ramblings of a sick man. The night was going to be hard, endless, agonizing. The first thing Jason heard when he entered the house in the morning was the cry of a baby. His heart quickened. For a few moments he stood in the hallway as if afraid to move. The arrival of his daughter was a surprise he had not expected to receive that morning. It was no less of a surprise that Annie was giving birth to a girl. And Katie, covered in a warm blanket, was resting on the bed. She smiled and held out her hand to him. "How I thought it was early," Jason mumbled confusedly. She rushed at Katie, answered him in a weak voice. The experience of childbirth was a life-changing one, not only for the laboring woman herself, but also for her longtime detractor. We see the fear she experienced that night. Something changed in her soul. Annie became even more withdrawn and silent, and soon surprised everyone with a new decision. "I'm going into a convent. I've already written a letter, and I've been told they're waiting for me." "You've decided that?" Jason marveled. "You can't make it up. I need a secretary in the office right now. Thought I'd offer you one. No. It's already decided," she replied calmly. And after asking to be left alone with Katie, said, "I'm sorry for everything. I'm going away to absolve myself of my sins beforehand. I want to apologize right away. Jason, I didn't cheat on you. I made it up at the time to hurt you. I thought you were the cause of all my troubles, but you weren't." And she left, apparently finding herself in ministry. In letters, she regularly reported that she was living well. She promised to come visit by summer. It took Jason and Kathy a long time to get used to it, but in time they accepted it as it was. They named their daughter Barbara. The girl, with the same red hair and funny ears as her mother's, grew up to be a fun-loving, naughty girl. Especially her appearance pleased the twins. They did not dote on her. They fulfilled all requests and took her with them on important tasks, such as hammering apples or eating currants from the neighbors' bushes. In a few years, the farm had grown to the size of a large farm and was already bringing the owners a good income. The road they had built to the village carried daily loads of milk, eggs, hay, and straw. Jason, who had started with zero knowledge, was suddenly one of the most experienced farmers in the area, and he was very proud of it. Past sufferings lost their former meaning: a cozy and hospitable house, a friendly family. Now they had everything for real happiness.